Hi guys, I like to take the moment to read a Google Doc. Yes, that's right, I'll be reading the Google Doc from YasuVF, Sinder versus the Clout Coven. Now, if you haven't heard of it, there is a post on X from YasuVF that was posted on May 7th, 2025, so like about a week or so after the Google Docs dropped back in April. So, yeah, so, oh, and also here on May 7th, YasuVF says, surprised so many have read this. I know the doc won't change much, no new evidence, no real closure, but I thought standing on the truth was something people could at least respect. Bigger voices probably won't chip in, and I don't blame them, but hey, worth a shot. And reaches out to Powdery and Mizu Tamari VT. Oh, that's cool. Anyway, you can read the Google Doc here, but I just want to take a moment to just go ahead and just read everything that this document has to offer, because why not, you know? I know I've like said, hey, you should read it, but if you haven't read it, well, hey, I'll just read it to you. Why not? So, let's get started. So, this is the personalized introduction of the Google Doc, and you can't really see it, but it is Sinder versus the Clout Coven. So, yeah, this video is just me reading it, so let's begin. Personalized Introduction. My name is Yasu. I'm not a lawyer, nor am I affiliated with any party involved in this situation. I'm simply someone who watched this unfold and found myself increasingly disturbed, not by the existence of conflict, but by the way it was handled. I'm not writing this to exonerate or condemn anyone by default. My goal is to analyze what's been said, what hasn't, and what's been implied, and do so with a level of discipline that I believe has been missing from most public conversations around this. Emotion has value, but it can't substitute for evidence. To be clear, I don't know Cinder personally, but based on the public documentation and video of evidence available, I believe she has been disproportionately affected by claims that, when examined under legal and logical scrutiny, don't hold the weight they've been given. The purpose of this work is not to take sides, but to insist that fairness, consistency, and context are applied, even when public opinion has already rendered its verdict. Objective statement. This paper critically examines whether the public actions and statements made by Bao-Shylily and Nanoless rise to the level of reputational defamation or malicious misrepresentation against Sinder, who was treated as the plaintiff for the purpose of this analysis. Though not a legal filing, this document is structured with legal scrutiny in mind and seeks to apply a defamation framework grounded in case law and standards for public figures. Bao-Shylily and Nanoless are regarded here as defendants, not out of personal animosity, but to fairly assess their role in a coordinated public narrative that has caused measurable harm to Cinder's reputation, brand, and potentially her livelihood. The intent is not to vilify, but to hold a magnifying glass to behavior that may otherwise go unchecked in the social court of public opinion. This evaluation focuses on the content, timing, tone, and framing of the accusations presented, asking whether they were made with negligence, emotional recklessness, or deliberate intent. While I make no claim to secret knowledge, this entire paper is based exclusively on publicly available information. If additional facts come to light, the analysis is subject to change, but based on what is available now, the goal is simple: to ask the uncomfortable but necessary legal question: did this go too far? Case Introduction. Preamble. Definitions. Accusers. Preamble. Refers collectively to Bao-Shylily and Nanoless unless specified individually. Plaintiff. Core case. Refers to Sinder. Defendant. Core case. Refers to the individuals who have made defamatory claims about the plaintiff. Manipulation. The act of controlling or influencing someone in an unfair or insidious way, typically for one's own advantage. Gaslighting. Psychological manipulation over time that causes someone to question their own thoughts, reality, or memories, resulting in confusion, self-doubt, or emotional instability. Sabotage. The intentional disruption or damage of a system, operation, or relationship, often to prevent success or gain advantage. Operation. The execution of practical tasks, plans, or strategies, particularly within a business or procedural context. Unfair. Marked by injustice, partiality, or deception. Deceit. The act of concealing or misrepresenting the truth for the purpose of misleading or gaining an unfair advantage. Unjust, not based on or behaving according to what is morally right and fair. Deception, the deliberate act of misleading someone through lies, misstatements, or misdirection with the intent to gain advantage or avoid accountability. Steelmanned Claims. To present this fairly, I will first steelman the arguments currently circulating from the accusers. Their central claims are as follows: the plaintiff is a bad friend, gaslighting occurred, manipulation occurred, the plaintiff acted harshly and in a manner deserving of scrutiny. These claims are outlined in various publicly available documents and video statements made by the accusers. For transparency, I will provide access to these materials in the appendix. Claim extrapolation by accusers. Nanoless. Nanoless's testimony serves as the foundation of the broader controversy and contains the initial claims and evidence that others have since built upon. Bao's framing conflates operational actions, e.g. business decisions, with personal betrayal. This interpretation treats any strategic move, whether business-related or not, as manipulative or malicious. Bao also characterized her relationship with the plaintiff as a friendship, which likely deepens the sense of emotional betrayal reflected in her statements. Shylily publicly accused Sinder of manipulation and gaslighting, specifically in retaliation or in relation to people close to her. Like Bao, she appears to conflate professional strategy with emotional abuse, interpreting standard operational behavior as inherently malicious. Criticism of accusers' extrapolation. A central issue in this case arises from the failure of the accusers to maintain a clear separation between personal relationships and professional interactions. This conflation of roles and intent has resulted in subjective emotional responses being interpreted as evidence of misconduct. In legal and organizational standards, boundaries between personal sentiment and operational decision-making are critical. When such boundaries are blurred, business strategies may be misrepresented as personal attacks, and emotional grievances may be mistaken for actionable harm. The accuser's framing of events repeatedly shifts between emotional language and claims of professional wrongdoing without clearly establishing where one ends and the other begins. This ambiguity calls into question the objectivity and validity of the accusations presented. Addressing the proposed evidence. All three accusers have published lengthy testimonials targeting the plaintiff. However, upon review, these materials primarily indicate poor operational judgment or unprofessional communication, not the criminal or abusive behavior claimed. Many of the testimonies rely heavily on hearsay or unverifiable recollection, using phrases like "I heard," "I remember," or "I felt." This lack of objective evidence weakens the credibility of the accusations. In fact, what has been presented so far only supports a case for mismanaged communication, not gaslighting, manipulation, or sabotage. Addressing any further claims or disputes, most of the concepts mentioned in the preamble have been shown in the analysis of the evidence provided. If you wish to question further points, I recommend you proceed to the critical review section of this paper and onward. Remember, this paper is not to make Sinder the defendant. This is to reframe Sinder as the plaintiff in a legal context. Core case. Core legal case defamation criteria. To establish a claim of defamation, the following elements must be satisfied. A false statement purporting to be fact, 1. 2. Publication or communication of that statement to a third party. 3. Fault amounting to at least negligence. 4. Damages or harm caused to the subject's reputation. 5. In cases involving public figures, actual malice must be proven. Each of these criteria will be examined in relation to the defendant's statements. 1. False statement presented as fact. Actions. All three defendants presented their arguments in emotionally charged formats, but Bao and Shylily in particular relied heavily on heightened emotional framing to reinforce their claims. This increased the perceived credibility of their accusations while circumventing more rigorous standards of proof typically expected in matters of public allegation. The defendants used terms like manipulative, gaslighting, and sabotage to describe the plaintiff's actions. While these terms could be construed as opinion in a casual context, in this case they were repeatedly accompanied by allegations of misconduct and paired with what was presented as factual evidence. When opinion is framed with an implied factual basis and used to assert wrongdoing, it may lose its protected status under defamation law. Shylily and Bao in particular presented their accusations in emotionally charged but definitive language, conveying certainty rather than speculation. If the statements were not accompanied by full context or were based on incomplete or distorted representations, they may qualify as false statements of fact. 2. Publication to a third party, public. Each of the defendants made their statements in a public forum. Bao via live stream and published statement, Shylily via live stream and social posts, Nanoless via a publicly shared document. These were disseminated to audiences ranging from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands, easily satisfying the publication requirement. 3. Negligence or malice intent. Given the plaintiff's status as a VTuber with public standing, the standard is higher. Actual malice must be demonstrated. This means the defendants must have either known that their statements were false or acted with reckless disregard for whether they were true or false. Evidence in this case includes statements based on secondhand recollections or hearsay, "I heard," "I remember," etc., lack of corroborating evidence, screenshots presented without context or verification, logical incoherence within their narrative, which undermines credibility and may reflect intent to mislead, potential personal bias influencing the tone and content of the accusations, Logical incoherency, especially when it arises in the framing of timeline, motives, or factual claims, serves not merely as a flaw, but as potential evidence of recklessness or intentional deception. In legal analysis, when a party's narrative is internally contradictory, yet still pushed publicly as fact, it may reflect knowledge of falsehood or a reckless indifference to truth. The emotionally charged nature of the public posts and videos further suggests that the statements were not the product of a methodical review of facts, but rather an impassioned outcry. This introduces the possibility that the defendants, in prioritizing emotional resonance, neglected to verify the accuracy or proportionality of their claims. When allegations are made in such a highly charged atmosphere, the risk of reckless disregard increases, particularly when they are presented as fact to large audiences without substantiated context. If the defendants made claims without verifying their accuracy or deliberately omitted exonerating context, this may meet the actual malice standard. 4. Harm to reputation damages. The plaintiff experienced the following measurable harms: loss of brand deals or sponsorships, reduced social media engagement and follower count, negative public sentiment, and targeted harassment. Each of these constitutes reputational harm directly resulting from the public nature of the defendant's accusations. 5. Blurred boundaries and mischaracterization. Fault. A key component of this case is the defendant's failure to maintain clear boundaries between personal grievance and professional conduct. The blurred line between emotional betrayal and operational decision-making has resulted in a mischaracterization of the plaintiff's actions. Actions that may be strategic or administrative in nature have been portrayed as malicious. Emotional fallout has been reframed as evidence of unethical behavior. This framing is particularly concerning in situations where standard business discussions, such as prioritizing resources, planning partnerships, or evaluating exclusivity, are presented to the public as evidence of manipulation or bad intent. When business conduct is emotionally repackaged to imply abuse, betrayal, or deceit, it risks misleading audiences into drawing harmful conclusions unsupported by objective fact. In legal terms, this may constitute defamation by implication, where a misleading representation of events paints a false and damaging picture. A key component of this case is the defendant's failure to maintain clear boundaries between personal grievance and professional conduct. The blurred line between emotional betrayal and operational decision-making has resulted in a mischaracterization of the plaintiff's actions. Actions that may be strategic or administrative in nature have been portrayed as malicious. Emotional fallout has been reframed as evidence of unethical behavior. In legal terms, this may constitute defamation by implication, where a misleading presentation of events paints a false and damaging picture. Did I just read that again? I think I just read that again. Whatever. Evidentiary Breakdown. Section 1. False statements presented as fact actions. Claim: the plaintiff Sinder was manipulative, coercive, or abusive in what was presented and said to be personal matters. Primary source of evidence: Nanoless's public document and supporting posts by Bao-Shylily. Exhibit A1. Nanoless document presents negotiation and planning discussions as coercive or manipulative without presenting evidence of threats, control, or coercion. Analysis: language such as "I felt pressured" and "they made me feel like" is used repeatedly without objective confirmation or corroboration. The tone frames standard business negotiation discussing availability, branding, and workload as manipulation. Contextual note: the document lacks timestamps, full message chains, or verification. Key screenshots are redacted or partial. Exhibit A2. Bao-Shylily's public comments rely heavily on Nanoless's framing, using emotionally loaded language like gaslighting and controlling to reinforce the interpretation. Analysis: neither Bao nor Shylily provide new evidence supporting their restated claims. Their remarks amplify a narrative built on emotionally interpretive descriptions. Conclusion for Section 1. The use of emotionally charged terms without objective backing transforms subjective feelings into defamatory implications. The framing misleads audiences into perceiving calculated malice where there is insufficient factual support. This supports the first standard of defamation: false statements presented as fact. Section 2. Publication to a third party. Public. Claim: the alleged defamatory statements were made publicly, satisfying the legal requirement for third-party publication. Evidence. Exhibit B1. Bao's livestream, public broadcast on Twitch, YouTube, reached tens of thousands of live viewers and more through re-uploads and Twitter clips. Language used was definitive, not speculative, referring to Sinder's conduct as harmful, manipulative, and disappointing. Exhibit B2. Shylily's livestream and Twitter replies made emotionally charged statements about manipulation and gaslighting, directly naming Sinder. Statements circulated widely across social media and were quoted in commentary videos and fan threads. Exhibit B3. Nanoless public Google Doc, shared widely via social media forums and Twitter threads, acted as the primary source of narrative framing, later echoed by Bao and Shylily. Exhibit B4. Bao's public document. explicitly reiterates and expands upon Nanoless's claims, amplifying the defamatory narrative, was independently circulated online, further increasing public exposure to the claims. Conclusion for Section 2. The defendants did not merely express grievances privately or among colleagues, they pushed their allegations to vast online audiences through multiple platforms. These statements, made with the expectation and intent of public visibility, clearly fulfill the publication requirement for defamation. Section 3. Negligence or actual malice. Intent. Claim. The defendants acted with reckless disregard for the truth or intentionally spread misleading claims, meeting the actual malice standard required for public figures. Evidence. Exhibit C1. Nanoless's framing of negotiation messages as manipulative and deceitful despite lack of any threats, demands, or forceful language. Analysis. Recasting standard operational discussions as emotional abuse misleads audiences. The failure to distinguish strategic decision-making from coercion suggests either intentional distortion or negligent misinterpretation. Exhibit C2. Bao-Shylilly's amplification of claims without contributing new evidence. Analysis. Relying entirely on Nanoless's version without verification while publicly repeating it to mass audiences. Suggests reckless indifference to accuracy. Exhibit C3. The Bao-Shylily Paradox. Assuming Bao and Shylily are aware of their audience's emotionally reactive nature, if they saw Sinder as a friend, then releasing emotionally charged frustrations publicly, knowing the likely outcome, suggests malicious intent. If they saw Sinder as both friend and business partner, as implied by their own framing, then not only does their conduct reflect potential malice, but also possible predetermination. If, alternatively, they saw her purely as a business rival, then their actions appear as strategic defamation under the guise of moral outrage. Each framing, personal, hybrid, or professional, leads to a damaging conclusion. Conclusion for Section 3. The defendants either knowingly exaggerated the plaintiff's conduct or failed to verify the accuracy of their claims before promoting them publicly. Combined with the paradox of their intent and the emotionally volatile climate in which the claims were published, this supports the third standard, negligence or actual malice. Section 4. Harm to reputation, damages. Claim. The public accusations made by the defendants have materially harmed the plaintiff's reputation, career, and livelihood. Evidence. Exhibit D1. Business fallout. Documented loss of brand deals, sponsorships, and collaborations after the public release of the allegations. Measurable decline in engagement across platforms, e.g. social media, followers, average viewership, merchandise sales. Exhibit D2. Community harassment, surge in hostile comments, threats, and targeted campaigns following the public statements by the defendants. Documentation from moderation logs, DMs, and comments showing an uptick in harassment directly tied to the timing of the public disclosures. Exhibit D3. Professional isolation. Notable decline in collaborative opportunities with other creators. Social distancing from peers, many of whom explicitly cited the accusations as the reason. Analysis. The reputational harm was not theoretical. It was immediate and sustained. In defamation cases, especially involving public figures, actual damage to professional standing and public perception is essential to proving liability. These metrics provide quantifiable evidence of injury. In tandem with the emotionally charged framing used by the defendants, the public's reaction was not only predictable, it was incited. By weaponizing sympathy and emotional framing to broadcast their version of events, the defendants contributed directly to the reputational collapse of the plaintiff. Conclusion for Section 4. The plaintiffs suffered verifiable and measurable reputational harm as a direct result of the defendants' statements. These damages satisfy the legal requirement for harm in a defamation case, especially under the public figure standard. Section 5. Defamation by implication and blurred boundaries. Fault. Claim. Even if the defendant's statements do not contain outright falsehoods, the way they presented and framed their allegations constitutes defamation by implication, particularly due to their emotional presentation and the intentional blurring of personal and professional boundaries. Key concepts. Defamation by implication occurs when true statements are presented in such a way that they create a false and defamatory impression. When plaintiffs deliberately withhold context or selectively present facts to guide the audience to a damaging conclusion, it may be legally actionable, even if the base facts are technically accurate. Evidence of implication. E1. Nanoless's business negotiation screenshots were presented as coercion despite the absence of threats, ultimatums, or demand language. E2. Bao framed operational decisions such as editing contracts or working relationships as betrayal while simultaneously acknowledging the dual business friend dynamic. E3. Shylily used emotionally heavy language, gaslighting, and manipulation, while avoiding concrete examples, leaving her audience to infer guilt through tone and implication, blurred boundaries as a legal vulnerability. The most legally significant factor here is the deliberate shifting between friend and colleague roles by the defendants. By selectively invoking whichever category best served their emotional narrative, they 1. Positioned Sinder as a betrayer of personal trust when the conduct was purely professional, 2. Positioned themselves as victims of abuse while continuing to speak with the authority of professional peers, 3. Use these contradictions to amplify emotional impact, garnering sympathy while avoiding accountability for misrepresenting intentions. This pattern demonstrates either willful manipulation of audience perception or reckless disregard for how blurred messaging would be received, both of which lend credibility to a claim of actual malice. Conclusion for Section 5. The accusations made by the defendants cannot be evaluated purely on the truth of their words, but also on how those words were framed. The blurred boundary between personal and professional grievance served to mislead the audience and defame the plaintiff through implication, an increasingly relevant and litigated concept in online defamation law. Closing statement. This document does not seek to portray Sinder as flawless or beyond criticism. Rather, it contends that criticism, when weaponized through emotional framing, strategically timed disclosures, and selective interpretations of professional conduct, can cross the threshold from community discourse into reputational sabotage. The public narrative surrounding this case has relied less on concrete verifiable misconduct and more on emotionally charged storytelling amplified by public-facing platforms. In doing so, the accusers have created an ecosystem where personal perception has been mistaken for moral certainty and public accountability has been substituted with emotional escalation. When influential creators leverage their platforms to present subjective grievances as objective wrongdoing, especially without sufficient evidence, they risk inflicting real-world harm on those they claim to expose. That harm in this case appears measurable, reputational, and, under legal scrutiny, potentially actionable. Whether or not this matter ever reaches a courtroom, the standard of fairness in discourse must remain consistent. If one party is expected to answer for their mistakes, then those doing the accusing must be held to the same ethical and possibly legal standard. Accountability cannot be a one-way street. The Bao-Shylily Paradox Introduction. The Bao-Shylily Paradox represents a critical junction in the analysis of the VTuber controversy involving Sinder. It confronts a legal and ethical dilemma. How should one interpret emotionally charged accusations made in a professional space when those making the accusations straddle the line between friend and business partner? This paradox does not simply question intent, it questions accountability, motive, and foresight. This paper will explore the paradox in depth, accounting for alternative interpretations, potential justifications, and their limitations under legal and logical scrutiny. Definition of the paradox. Can't talk. The paradox is framed as follows. If Bao and Shylily viewed Sinder as a friend, then choosing to air grievances publicly, knowing the size and aggression of their fan bases, implies foreknowledge of harm. That is to say, they knew going public would damage her, yet did so anyway. This opens the question of malice. If they saw her as a business partner, their actions resemble strategic defamation, calculated public disclosures, and leverage emotional framing to cast Sinder in a morally reprehensible light while increasing their own moral authority. If they saw her as both friend and business partner, a common blend in VTubing, then the failure to separate emotional disappointment from professional conduct constitutes either gross negligence or intentional framing. Intent versus outcome. Intent is difficult to prove, but outcome is not. Releasing statements to millions of followers, timed together and linked in theme, predictably created a firestorm. If they had no intent to harm, they lacked caution. If they did have intent, it raises the legal stakes considerably. The consistency of tone, language, and emotional priming across their testimonies reflects coordination, or at least shared awareness of impact. Importantly, both Bao and Shylily admitted in their public videos that they sat on this information for some time, discussed it behind closed doors, and planned its release. This directly undermines any defense of spontaneous emotional reaction. Instead, it confirms a degree of strategic forethought, further reinforcing the possibility of premeditated reputational harm. Alternative interpretations. 1. They were deeply hurt and active impulsively. This is plausible, but such emotional impulse doesn't excuse consequences when it involves public defamation of another figure. In legal terms, it might reduce culpability, but not eliminate it. 2. They believed the public had a right to know. Transparency is often framed as as a virtue, but publicizing internal business or relational drama without clear proof of malice or harm risks being framed as defamation under a legal lens, especially when reputational harm is foreseeable. They felt they had no other recourse. This explanation hinges on the belief that private resolution was impossible, yet none of the plaintiffs have shown strong evidence of sincere private attempts to resolve the issue beforehand. Foresight and responsibility. Both Bao and Shylily are seasoned entertainers with knowledge of the power of their platforms. It is not unreasonable to assume they understood what public alignment against Sinder would trigger. That knowledge translates to foreseeable harm. In legal analysis, foreseeable harm caused by avoidable actions, especially if it benefits the speaker or their brand, raises questions of negligence or strategic malice. Summary judgment. The Bao-Shylily Paradox does not attempt to definitively label them as malicious actors. Instead, it highlights a contradiction that undermines their own moral high ground. If it was emotional honesty, it was reckless. If it was strategy, it was exploitative. If it was both, it may be both unethical and legally questionable. This analysis does not absolve Sinder of all responsibility, but it frames the narrative of pure victimhood from Bao and Shylily. Their paradox is not in whether they were hurt, but in how they chose to act on that hurt in a public and highly consequential way. Conclusion. Until this paradox is addressed by Bao and Shylily, either in clarity of intent or acknowledgement of impact, their defense remains structurally compromised. Emotion does not excuse outcome, and narrative control should not override legal standards of fairness and harm mitigation. Alright. Pattern of conduct. Overview. This section outlines a demonstrable pattern of conduct by Bao, Shylily, and Nanoless that suggests their actions were not spontaneous emotional reactions, but rather premeditated and coordinated disclosures framed in a way that maximized reputational harm to Sinder while concealing or downplaying their own accountability. 1. Chronology of internal conflict. Nanoless, as revealed in public statements and evidence leaks, was the originator of the grievances. Shylily had already begun ghosting Sinder well before the public controversy, suggesting prior emotional distancing. According to Discord logs and Bao's own livestream, discussions about Sinder's conduct were ongoing for months prior to the public fallout. There is evidence that this trio discussed Sinder's behavior privately and potentially made strategic decisions on how to present the issue to the public. 2. Coordinated release timing. All three parties released their statements, documents, and streams within the same 48-hour period. The coordinated timing gave their claims maximum exposure and ensured Sinder had minimal opportunity to respond before a narrative had already formed. Shylily and Bao publicly supported one another's statements immediately after release, creating an echo chamber of legitimacy. 3. The Bao-Shylily Paradox. As established earlier, if Sinder was a friend, going public demonstrated knowledge of the harm it would cause. If she was a business partner, their conduct resembled strategic defamation with clear forethought. Their actions, public alignment, emotionally charged framing, selective evidence usage, are inconsistent with genuine moral outrage alone. 4. Rejection of Sinder's disclaimer. Sinder publicly stated that she was unaware of Red's more severe actions. Instead of acknowledging this distinction or shifting blame accordingly, Bao and Shylily continued to tie Sinder directly to every allegation, reinforcing the perception of unified guilt. The refusal to distinguish between Sinder and her manager suggests an unwillingness to engage in good faith discourse, further hinting at reputational targeting. 5. Reinforced emotional framing. Bao's livestream was emotionally loaded, and her statements were infused with rhetorical techniques designed to sway viewers, tears, appeals to betrayal, and language that blurred professional and personal boundaries. Shylily's public threat and behavior mirrored this tone, relying more on evocative narrative than legal or operational clarity. These framing techniques, while not illegal, are often employed in smear campaigns to evoke empathy and suppress critical inquiry. 6. Prior disdain and pre-existing tensions. Evidence suggests Shylily expressed dislike or distrust towards Sinder before the public drama. Fans and community members noted a visible absence of interaction between them after joint events like the V-Card pack release. These observations, combined with evidence from leaked Discord chats, indicate long-standing interpersonal strain that was never addressed privately before going public. Conclusion. The conduct of Bao, Shylily, and Nanoless exhibits characteristics that could be interpreted as coordinated and emotionally charged. While their actions may reflect genuine personal grievances, the consistency in tone, timing, and framing, paired with prior discussions, raises questions about the possibility of strategic alignment. Though there is no definitive evidence proving malicious intent, the public presentation of their statements, especially when set against the known internal tensions and the lack of private resolution, creates an appearance of reputational harm that may not have been entirely unintended. Whether this was an organic outpouring of frustration or a calculated release is speculative, but the resulting impact on Sinder's brand and reputation is significant. While their actions likely fall under protected speech and opinion, the ethical implications remain complex, particularly when personal, and professional boundaries are blurred. Whoops. Oh, I can do that. Oop. Nope. Okay. Critical Review, Analysis of Statements by Bao-Shylily and Nanoless. Overview. In April 2025, independent VTuber artist Nanoless went public with a detailed document accusing fellow VTuber Sinder and Sinder's manager known as Red or Redacted of manipulation, slander, and other ethical behavior. Following this, two of Sinder's colleagues and friends, Bao the Whale, and Shylily, each made public responses supporting Nanoless's claims and sharing their own experiences. All three statements are highly charged and accusatory. Below, we analyze each person's statements from an objective legal perspective, focusing on 1. Emotionally charged, potentially defamatory language stated as fact, 2. Any logical inconsistencies or contradictory framing, 3. Defamation by implication, 4. Unsubstantiated accusations, claims without proof, and 5. Use of public sentiment or fan pressure to bolster their position. We also note that when one party repeats another's claims without new evidence, each section is dedicated to one individual's statements with a final overview of notable legal implications such as reckless framing, emotional testimony presented as fact, and indications of negligence or malice. Nanoless's statement, terminating my work with Sinder document. Context. Nanoless's statement was a 23-page Google document titled Terminating My Work with Sinder, posted on April 26, 2025. In it, the artist explains why she will no longer work with Sinder and details a series of allegations against Sinder and her manager, referred to collectively as they. The document includes numerous Discord screenshots as evidence. Below is a breakdown of Nanoless's claims and the way they are presented. Emotionally charged language presented as fact. Nanoless uses strong emotionally charged terms to characterize Sinder and Red's behavior. Often framing accusations as factual certainties, she accuses them of manipulating me, using me, and dragging me into drama while sabotaging, slandering, and spreading lies about people I thought were her closest friends. Terms like sabotaging and slandering are legally significant and constitute accusations of serious wrongdoing. If these statements are false or unprovable, they could be deemed defamatory per se. Throughout the document, Nanoless continues using inflammatory descriptors such as calling exclusivity demands insane and hurtful, and describing behaviors as ironic and crazy. These betrayals amplify the emotional impact, but also risk transforming subjective experience into apparent fact in the eyes of readers, especially if these claims are later shown to lack factual basis. Defamation by implication and interpretation. Rather than quoting Sinder directly, making disparaging remarks, Nanoless implies Sinder's involvement through phrases like what she has been doing behind people's backs. Even though Red authored most statements, Nanoless's framing makes it appear as though Sinder co-signed or orchestrated them. This inference may constitute defamatory implication if Sinder did not explicitly endorse those views or actions. The exclusivity issue, presented as coercive and manipulative by Nanoless, could be reinterpreted as a poorly framed business proposal rather than malicious sabotage. Her document reflects her interpretation, not necessarily provable intent from the accused. Still, readers unfamiliar with nuance may take her interpretation as fact. Use of public sentiment and fan-base pressure. Nanoless positions her document as a warning to others, stating that she aimed to shed light on what Sinder has been doing behind people's backs to protect artists and friends. This move harnesses public sentiment, positioning her as a whistleblower while casting Sinder as a systemic threat. This strategic framing successfully mobilized public sympathy and resulted in reputational damage to Sinder. While the document was backed by evidence, much of its impact came from emotionally resonant narrative and the implication that silence meant complicity, a framing that exerted intense public pressure. Summary: the key contradiction arises from the Bao-Shylily Paradox, which applies here as well. If Nanoless viewed Sinder as a friend, then going public suggests foreknowledge that this action would harm Sinder's reputation, and thus may reflect malice or recklessness. If instead she saw Sinder as a business partner, then framing a business dispute in emotionally charged public-facing terms and interpreting business discussions as personal manipulation may border on reputational sabotage. Her document walks this line closely. Though it is largely consistent and supported by screenshots, its framing and emotional tone imply a narrative of personal betrayal and public callout. Whether intentional or not, its effect was to catalyze reputational harm and rally others against Sinder, thus fulfilling the paradox. Either the act was a misjudged personal grievance or a calculated business-level takedown. In either framing, it shows intent or disregard for the outcome, which could become significant in legal evaluation. Bao's statement. Context: Bao is a well-known indie VTuber who had been friendly with Sinder. They had collaborated in the past with no public friction. After Nanoless's document went public, Bao discovered she had been the subject of some of the alleged internal criticisms made by Sinder's team. Bao responded on April 27, 2025 via a public Twitter thread, or Twitlonger, referred to colloquially as Bao's document. In her post, Bao expressed betrayal and addressed specific accusations involving her. Emotionally charged or defamatory language. Bao's tone throughout her statement is one of hurt and disappointment. However, she uses serious language, accusing Sinder and her manager Red of attempting to sabotage her through fake allegations. This terminology implies deliberate malice and, if untrue, could be considered defamatory. She also emphasizes their prior friendship, presenting the alleged sabotage as a betrayal of trust. While less aggressive than Shylilly's statements, Bao still frames the situation as calculated harm against her. Defamation by implication. Bao strongly implies that Sinder herself was engaged in spreading harmful false claims. Her phrase, "friends don't sabotage friends," paints the situation not only as business conflict, but personal betrayal. She infers that Sinder deliberately tried to harm her career under false pretenses. If Sinder had no knowledge or involvement in Red's remarks, Bao's statements could mislead audiences into believing Sinder was acting maliciously. This is a textbook example of defamation by implication, where the overall impression is damaging even if not all statements are factually false. Accusations without substantiating evidence. Bao presents no original screenshots or documentary evidence of Sinder's direct actions. Instead, she affirms Nanoless's evidence and adds context, particularly about the editor dispute. Her allegations regarding sabotage stem from inference, connecting Nanoless's claims to her own experiences. This bolsters Nanoless's position but introduces potential liability if the foundational claims are incorrect or misrepresented. Leveraging public sentiment. Bao's post is emotionally resonant and strategically timed. Her statements framing herself as a betrayed friend and unjustly maligned peer garnered widespread community sympathy. Many major VTubers voiced support, amplifying her claims. While Bao did not directly incite backlash, her words catalyzed it. The viral spread of emotionally charged accusations, especially when they imply moral failure, intensifies reputational harm. This also underscores the Bao-Shylily Paradox. The Bao-Shylily Paradox. If they saw Sinder as a friend, going public demonstrates foreknowledge of harm. If they saw her as a business partner, then the calculated publicity resembles reputational sabotage under the guise of moral outcry. Their strategic alignment, timing, and tone indicates potential forethought and tactical execution. Summary: Bao's statement blends sincere emotional reflection with accusatory framing. While she maintains a tone of disappointment, her implications carry serious weight, accusing Sinder of betrayal and sabotage. Though her direct claims are few, their impact is amplified by her alignment with Nanoless's accusations and the emotional weight of her public persona. Her statements walk a fine line between testimony and defamation by implication. Whether she intended it or not, the timing, tone, and lack of new substantiating evidence frame the release as reputationally damaging. Given that her friendship with Sinder was previously private and the evidence ambiguous, the decision to go public, especially under the guise of moral clarity, suggests premeditation or at least awareness of the likely consequences. Shylilly's statement. Context. Shylilly is a popular VTuber who, like Bao, was friends with Sinder. She is known for being friendly and relatively drama-averse, which made her ensuing response even more striking to observers. After Nanoless's doc and the wave of support for Nanoless and Bao, Sinder released a public Google Doc apology titled My Apology around April 27 or 28, 2025. In that apology, Sinder acknowledged some issues, confirming she was dating her manager, stating she ended the professional relationship with him, and apologizing generally. Shylilly was dissatisfied with Sinder's apology and posted a lengthy rebuttal on Twitter, possibly via Twitlonger, effectively slamming Sinder and adding new allegations. Shylilly's response is extremely candid and heated. Below is the analysis of Shylilly's statement. Emotionally charged defamatory language presented as fact. Shylilly's response is replete with emotionally charged language, arguably the strongest of the three. She does not mince words in expressing her outrage. For example, she begins by addressing Sinder directly with, "The absolute audacity to sit here and continue to manipulate and gaslight is absolute insanity." Here, Shylilly is accusing Sinder's apology itself of being manipulative and deceitful gaslighting. This is a factual claim that Sinder is currently manipulating and gaslighting the audience or friends by means of her apology. Couched in very sharp language, she goes on to say, "The pain and mental torment you've caused to the ones closest and most supportive of you has been devastating, and you are the fakest person I've ever had the displeasure of supporting." Calling Sinder the fakest person Shylilly has ever supported is an insult, but also an imputation about Sinder's character. Shylilly further accuses Sinder of actively lying and acting in true narcissistic fashion. These are sweeping generalizations presented as fact. If untrue, such statements may be seen as per se defamatory. Defamation by implication. Shylilly implies that Sinder's apology was an insincere PR stunt. She frames it as manipulative, saying Sinder is trying to salvage your career and feels sorry only for herself. These implications suggest Sinder is acting in bad faith without direct evidence that Sinder was insincere. These implications could fall into the category of defamation by implication, especially as they frame her actions as intentionally dishonest or exploitative. Accusations lacking substantiation. Shylily introduces several new accusations that are not supported by public evidence. For example, she claims Sinder lied about a scheduling conflict in order to secure a bag and compete with her. These allegations are serious but are based solely on Shylily's testimony. While emotionally persuasive, their evidentiary strength is weak without corroboration. Claims about Sinder's general behavior, like "you consistently chose business over friends," rely on personal interpretation rather than concrete proof. Use of public statement fan-based pressure. Shylily's post significantly contributed to the public backlash against Sinder. By using emotionally charged language and positioning herself as a betrayed friend, she rallied support and intensified community outrage. Statements like "makes me want to vomit" and "you are the fakest person" evoke strong emotional reactions from readers. Shylily's stature in the VTuber community gave these words considerable weight. Though she did not instruct fans to act against Sinder, her statements implicitly encouraged condemnation. Summary: Shylily's statement is a scathing critique of Sinder, containing multiple claims that, if untrue, could be seen as defamatory. She calls Sinder manipulative, narcissistic, dishonest, and selfish. Her claims are largely based on personal interpretation and testimony, rather than public evidence. The lack of supporting documentation weakens the credibility of some of the most serious allegations. However, her statements were deeply influential in shaping public opinion. Whether intentionally or not, Shylily's words framed Sinder as an irredeemable and helped solidify the narrative that she was guilty of serious personal and professional wrongdoing. Her approach, though emotional and likely heartfelt, demonstrates the core problem. Emotional testimony presented as fact, weaponized through massive public reach, creating reputational harm regardless of legal standing. Final thoughts. Summary of the trio statements. Bao, Shylily, and Nanoless each presented their claims with a high degree of certainty and moral judgment, delivering emotionally charged accusations of unethical behavior, including slander, manipulation, interference in business affairs, and betrayal. Their statements lacked hedging language, opting instead for definitive assertions that frame Sinder's actions as clear wrongdoing. While emotionally potent, this approach carries legal risk if the claims were false or misleading, especially due to their scale and reputational impact. However, their alignment in narrative and corroborating testimonies lent them considerable strength in the public sphere, if not in legal court. The Bao-Shylily Paradox. A key element of this case is what we have termed the Bao-Shylily Paradox. If Bao and Shylily considered Sinder a friend, then their choice to go public with emotionally charged accusations demonstrates foreknowledge or of reputational harm, raising the question of malice. If they saw her solely as a business partner, then their timing and tone strongly resemble calculated reputational sabotage under the guise of moral responsibility. If they viewed her as both a hybrid friend and business peer, the blurred boundaries revealed negligence at best and tactical exploitation at worst. This paradox complicates the defense of their actions. While they may not have coordinated their releases with intent to harm, the effect of their actions resulted in massive reputational damage. The line between honest expression and strategic defamation becomes increasingly blurred when the speaker benefits socially or professionally from a dramatic disclosure. Critical evaluation. While Nanoless provided most of the original materials and screenshots, Bao and Shylily amplified the narrative and added new allegations. Their tone and word choice are emotionally charged, but they also consistently reflect the themes established in Nanoless's document. Statements like manipulative, gaslighting, fake, and narcissistic may be seen as defamatory in isolation, but are couched here within personal experience and perceived wrongdoing. Importantly, despite Sinder's public response in which she distanced herself from Red's actions and claimed ignorance of several of his statements, Bao and Shylily continued to push their narrative without acknowledging this disclaimer. In several instances, they even doubled down on their accusations, reinforcing the idea that their framing was not simply emotional, but tactical. There are moments where the trio's language crosses into factual assertion without adequate clarification, a notable risk in legal interpretation. Conclusion. This case illustrates how personal grievances and professional fallout, when mixed, can lead to reputational collapse, especially in a public-facing industry like VTubing. The statements made by the three were framed as emotional responses but may have functioned as strategic counters to perceived manipulation or betrayal. Their credibility is strengthened by the timing and consistency of their accounts, but the same alignment may indicate forethought, especially considering the intensity and reach of the disclosures. The Bao-Shylily Paradox shows that, regardless of intent, such public statements carried predictable consequences, potentially undermining the just sharing our story defense. While not legally damning, their approach may be ethically questionable if the underlying motive was punitive or self-serving. Refer to the paradox. In the absence of direct evidence of falsehood or malice, their speech likely falls under protected opinion and truth-based defense, but the moral ambiguity of how they handled it remains an open question. Okay. Full analysis of Nanoless's claims. Review. Exhibit review screenshot August 5, 2024, 4:13 p.m. Reference context. Nanoless Discord conversation with redacted. Theme alleged. Manipulation, emotional coercion, and sabotage targeting Bao. Summary of content. The exchange features redacted checking in on whether Nanoless canceled her model commitments, expressing concern about timeline delays, and suggesting that Bao, described as having so many connections, would easily find a replacement. Nanoless admits being scared to cancel with Bao, and then volunteers to offer Bao the design for free as an apology gift. Nanoless's claim is stated publicly that Redacted, on behalf of Sinder, manipulated Nanoless into canceling on Bao mid-project, downplaying the harm and the weaponizing guilt to create sabotage and isolate Bao from shared collaborators. Objective legal assessment. Tone and wording. The tone of the conversation lacks authoritative or coercive language. No demand or threat is made. The encouragement appears passive and emotionally supportive, not manipulative. Initiation and autonomy. Nanoless volunteers the apology gesture unprompted. Redacted merely asks whether the cancellation happened and provided emotional reassurance, intent, and outcome. There is no evidence in the exchange that Redacted coerced or emotionally strong-armed Nanoless. No advantage to Sinder is explicitly requested or implied. Defamation by implication. While the messages themselves are neutral, their framing in Nanoless's public document significantly alters the perceived meaning, presenting Red's emotional reassurance as calculated manipulation. This alteration of tone and intention were presented to the public fulfills a classic pattern of defamation by implication. A private message, with innocuous content, refrained publicly is malicious without direct textual support. Conclusion. This screenshot, when reviewed without emotional framing, does not support the claim of manipulation or sabotage. It is a neutral logistical and emotional check-in reframed as misconduct. The contrast between the public accusation and private dialogue undermines the credibility of the manipulation narrative and may support claims of reputational harm via misrepresentation. Exhibit review screenshot January 15, 2025, 8:29 p.m. Reference context redacted to Nanoless regarding exclusivity and client blacklisting. Theme: alleged business manipulation, client control, and attempted monopolization of artist services. Summary of content. This message shows redacted suggesting that if Nanoless works exclusively with Sinder, they would ensure she is compensated through continuous commissions. Red emphasizes concerns that the more other VTubers use her work, the less unique Sinder's models become. There is also mention of avoiding new work with a specific, unnamed VTuber framed around brand protection, which is Silverveil. Nanoless's claim is stated publicly that Sinder and Red sought to blacklist other creators and coerce exclusivity from Nanoless, all while refusing to formally pay for that exclusivity, relying instead on emotional manipulation and work volume pressure to control her business choices. Objective legal assessment. Exclusivity discussion. It is not uncommon for talent managers or brand advisors to suggest exclusivity in creative work. The message presents exclusivity as a mutual benefit, albeit with unclear contractual boundaries. Tone and agency. The tone remains passive and negotiatory. There is no enforcement mechanism, demand, or punishment presented. The artist was not forced to agree. Lack of coercion. Nowhere in the message is the artist told she cannot work with others. Rather, the concern centers around brand dilution, a normal strategic business consideration. No clear quid pro quo. While some emotional language is used, such as the less special work becomes, this is framed within a business marketing lens, not as a demand or restriction. Defamation by implication. The public framing interprets this internal business speculation as sabotage and creator blacklisting, yet the conversation never prohibits Nanoless from taking external work, does not involve punishment, legal threat, or contract enforcement. It is built around brand protection language, which is normal in VTuber and modeling spaces. This reframing converts a non-binding proposal into an alleged coercive act without evidence of pressure or harm, forming the basis of defamation by implication. Conclusion. No direct evidence of wrongdoing is present in this exchange. Redacted expresses marketing concerns and proposes an informal exclusivity agreement that Nanoless was free to reject and later did. The dramatic reinterpretation of this conversation as maliciously coercive or industry sabotaging is unsubstantiated by the text itself. This contradiction damages the credibility of the plaintiff's framing and supports the idea that reputational harm was caused by strategic reframing, not factual misconduct. Exhibit review screenshot January 15, 2025, 8:33 p.m. Reference context. Read to Nanoless discussing exclusivity and justification for creator blacklisting. Theme alleged. Emotional manipulation, anti-competitive behavior, reputational framing. Summary of content. Red expands on the earlier exclusivity discussion, claiming that if Nanoless continues working with multiple creators, it diminishes the uniqueness of her previous work, particularly the models done for Sinder. He cites specific creators that Nanoless is allegedly not allowed to work with, and implies that frequent modeling with others causes visual and brand overlap, Nanoless's claim as stated publicly. That Red and Sinder sought to blacklist certain VTubers and emotionally manipulate Nanoless into exclusivity by suggesting that working with others damages prior work. This claim frames the statement as sabotage and coercion, objective legal assessment. Strategic commentary versus coercion. The statement reflects a strategic perspective on brand identity. Sinder's concern that overuse of a similar model style would reduce visual distinction in the competitive market. This is standard brand protection language, not a demand or binding instruction. Free market dynamics. The VTuber space is inherently competitive. Discussing exclusivity is not inherently coercive unless paired with financial or legal pressure, which is not present here. Nanoless was not forced into compliance. Emotionally loaded language. The repeated suggestion that Nanoless's art becomes less special may be emotionally frustrating but is not unlawful. Such statements reflect subjective opinion about branding, not a verifiable false statement, nor one that defames Nanoless or others. Defamation by implication. The public document reframes this exchange as evidence of unethical control and manipulation, yet no contractual obligation or threat was issued. Artist retained agency and ultimately declined exclusivity. The discussion centers around marketing optics, not sabotage or personal malice. The core legal issue lies in the plaintiff's public representation of this conversation. Turning a non-binding business concern into evidence of predatory behavior may constitute misleading interpretation, especially given the resulting reputational harm. Conclusion. While the phrasing may appear uncomfortable, this message does not support the accusations of blacklisting or sabotage when examined legally. It reflects a standard strategic concern about brand dilution in a saturated creator economy. The emotional and moral framing applied by the plaintiffs exceeds the content of the message and represents a clear case of defamation by implication, especially when amplified to a large audience under emotionally charged pretenses. Exhibit review screenshot, January 15, 2025, 8:37 p.m. Reference context. Red to Nanoless. Continuing discussion on exclusivity and specific client restrictions. Theme alleged. Blacklisting of creators, psychological coercion, market manipulation. Summary of content. Red provides a direct directive that Nanoless is not to work with a specific VTuber, redacted, including both full model commissions and outfit editions. This is justified with the reasoning that each additional model reduces the uniqueness of the existing one. The stated goal is to keep the Sinder brand from becoming diluted in aesthetic or association. Nanoless's claim, as stated publicly. The defendants are accused of blacklisting creators, coercing Nanoless into exclusivity, through guilt-tripping and brand-based fear, and manipulating business decisions by targeting competitors under personal pretenses. Objective legal assessment. Implying exclusivity without compensation. This message does approach ethically gray territory. Exclusivity discussions are valid in a business context when supported by compensation or contract. However, attempting to enforce client restrictions without legal agreement may raise issues of unfair expectation, especially when coupled with implied consequences or guilt. No binding enforcement or penalty. Crucially, Red does not threaten consequences nor invoke contractual backing. Nanoless appears to retain full freedom to decline and eventually did. This limits the claim's legal weight. Expression of preference versus coercion. There's a material difference between saying, I would prefer you didn't work with X versus you are not allowed to work with X. This message leans closer to the latter, which elevates the pressure but still does not meet the bar of legally enforceable demand or coercion without follow-up action. Defamation by implication. The plaintiff Nanoless frames this interaction as evidence of malicious control and unethical business behavior. However, the concern voiced is about visual branding and association, which is valid within competitive markets. No evidence of retaliation, enforcement, or client sabotage was provided. The public framing leaves out this business context, instead substituting a moralistic and emotional narrative. This selective portrayal transforms a questionable but legally non-binding directive into a perceived attack, escalating its weight in the public sphere beyond what the evidence supports. Conclusion. While the language used by Red is assertive and uncomfortable, it does not rise to the level of coercion or actionable sabotage on its own. However, the plaintiff's interpretation of this statement as evidence of unethical conduct, when contextualized publicly as part of a broader campaign, constitutes defamation by implication. The original message should be judged within its competitive and strategic business context, not emotional or moral framing applied retroactively. Exhibit review, screenshot. January 15, 2025, 8:39 p.m. Reference context. Red continues message chain with Nanoless regarding brand dilution and content saturation. Theme alleged: business coercion, emotional manipulation, exclusivity, summary of content. Red elaborates on the idea that if Nanoless continues creating models for other clients, her style becomes less special or unique. This devaluation, they argue, impacts Sinder's brand by association. The implication is that Nanoless's work on other models erodes the perceived uniqueness of the work she has done for Sinder. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. This message is cited as part of a pattern where the defendants, use guilt-based tactics to discourage Nanoless from working with others. It is claimed that this diminishes her autonomy as an artist and subtly pressures her into exclusivity under the guise of concern for branding. Objective legal assessment. Business framing present. Red frames the concern in brand terms, not emotional betrayal. The claim being made is, your work is associated with us and your broader output affects our perceived brand uniqueness. In isolation, this argument is valid in competitive creative industries. Many artists work under exclusive deals for exactly this reason. Absence of formal coercion. Red does not threaten Nanoless with business termination or public fallout. There is no punitive element tied to Nanoless's choice. This preserves her legal agency and weakens coercion arguments. Reframed publicly as psychological abuse, in Nanoless's public document, this business concern is portrayed as a form of emotional pressure, artistic devaluation, and manipulative guilt tripping. The issue is not the message itself, but the way it is emotionally interpreted and publicly weaponized. Defamation by implication. The original message is a subjective business opinion framed around branding and creative distinctiveness. However, when presented to the public as part of an overarching abuse narrative, it becomes a potential vehicle for defamation by implication. The message does not threaten, demean, or exploit, but the public framing suggests it does, and that the motive behind it was malicious control. This narrative gap introduces reasonable grounds for reputational damage due to misinterpretation or misrepresentation. Conclusion. While this message reflects a strategic and perhaps insensitive business outlook, it is not inherently manipulative or unethical by legal standards. The plaintiff retains autonomy and was under no obligation to comply. However, framing this discussion as abuse in a public document, especially without context or balance, contributes to the potential defamation claim. Exhibit review screenshot January 15, 2025, 8:41 p.m. Reference context, Red response to Nanoless expressing discomfort with exclusivity terms. Theme alleged, emotional pressure. Reframing intent, concealment of motive. Summary of content. Red appears to walk back the exclusivity pressure, saying that we never intended to make you feel forced. However, this is immediately followed by reiterating that Nanoless working with others diminishes the uniqueness of her work with Sinder. Red says the idea of exclusivity came from you, but then doubles down on branding concerns, reinforcing the message that non-exclusive work cheapens Sinder's image. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. Nanoless frames this message as an example of gaslighting and guilt-based manipulation, first denying intent, then reasserting the very behavior in question. She implies Red is attempting to emotionally corner her by shifting blame and using "it's just business" as a shield for coercive behavior. Objective legal assessment. Disputing intent versus stated intent. The message denies malice explicitly. We never intended to pressure you, but continues to reinforce an emotional consequence. Your other clients reduce our brand's value. This creates mixed messaging, which, while not inherently illegal, can be interpreted as emotional leverage in a power imbalance context. Legally non-coercive. There is still no demand, ultimatum, or threat. Red neither withholds work nor imposes consequences if Nanoless chooses to proceed with other clients. This undermines the case for outright coercion or sabotage. Subjective interpretation used to construct abusive narrative. Nanoless reinterprets this exchange as part of a larger emotional manipulation pattern in her public document. While subjectively valid, this recharacterization constitutes defamation by implication when presented as evidence of malicious wrongdoing without clear evidence of abuse. Pattern of reframing. This is how the third instance in which standard business concerns around exclusivity, branding, and artist value are publicly reframed as emotional exploitation. The court might see a pattern of reputational damage being built from ambiguous but legally neutral exchanges. Conclusion. Red's tone is dismissive and could be interpreted as emotionally insensitive, but there is no indication of malicious coercion or intent to harm. The claim that Red is gaslighting or emotionally abusing Nanoless is not supported by direct evidence in this screenshot alone. The reputation harm arises not from what was said, but how it was publicly framed. Exhibit review screenshot January 15, 2025, 8:44 p.m. Reference context. Red continues discussing brand exclusivity and uniqueness of Nanoless's work. Theme alleged, persistent emotional pressure disguised as branding advice. Summary of content. Red expands on the earlier point by stating that every time you do something for another person, it makes what you've done for Sinder less special. The language continues to position exclusivity not as a demand, but as a natural outcome of brand dilution, implying that Nanoless working with others devalues her existing work with Sinder. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. This message is cited by Nanoless as further emotional manipulation, reinforcing the narrative that Sinder and Red use strategic guilt and vague threats of devaluation to secure pseudo-exclusivity. She argues that it pushed her to feel isolated from the broader VTuber scene and fearful of damaging Sinder's brand. Objective legal assessment. Brand commentary versus personal threats. The statement focuses on brand impact, not personal obligation. There is no explicit request, directive, or coercive language, only a description of how perceived value may decline in the eyes of the audience. This is branding rhetoric, not behavioral control. Ambiguity, not grounds for malice. The subjective emotional impact of such a comment is acknowledged, but there is no evidence of malicious forethought. Business owners frequently express concern over artist saturation and market dilution. The claim of manipulation depends on tone and audience interpretation, not explicit statements. Defamation by implication risk. By publicly citing this exchange as proof of abuse or malicious behavior, Nanoless may be engaging in defamation by implication, especially since she offers no contrary messages or clarifications from Red that might confirm hostile intent. Pattern of emotional framing. This is the fourth instance in which business strategy language discussing brand dilution or exclusivity is publicly reframed as emotional coercion. Nanoless's document makes no attempt to reconcile industry norms with their emotional experience, leading to a skewed narrative. Conclusion. While the language is emotionally charged and potentially insensitive, it remains well within the bounds of business brand management. The claim of manipulation appears subjective, and the screenshot does not present an actionable threat or coercive tactic. Repeating this as proof of manipulation in public communications enhances the risk of a defamatory implication. Exhibit review screenshot January 15, 2025, 8:45 p.m. Reference context. Red allegedly clarifies that exclusivity wasn't something they wanted, then immediately reiterates concerns about uniqueness. Theme alleged gaslighting and emotional redirection. Summary of content. Red tells Nanoless that exclusivity wasn't what we wanted, suggesting that the arrangement was misunderstood. However, the follow-up reinforces the issue remains. Every time you do something for another person, it makes what you've done for Sinder less special. This apparent contradiction is used in the public framing to imply manipulation through confusion, saying one thing and then reinforcing the opposite outcome. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. Nanoless presents this message as gaslighting, arguing that Red minimized the exclusivity request while continuing to guilt her into restricting commissions. She frames it as an attempt to avoid responsibility while implying the same pressure, thus emotionally manipulating her into feeling indebted or guilty for branching out. Objective legal assessment. Ambiguous but not deceptive. Red appears to clarify that there was no formal exclusivity requirement, but still conveys concern over brand uniqueness. The inconsistency here may stem from poor communication, not deceit or gaslighting. The tone is advisory, not directive. Legal definition of gaslighting not met. There is no sustained attempt to undermine Nanoless's sense of reality or create psychological confusion over time. Criteria often required to claim gaslighting in a legal or clinical sense. This is a single conversation, and its emotional tone does not qualify as malicious manipulation. Lack of malicious intent or threat. No coercion, financial threats, or pressure are present. The message lacks malicious framing and does not include behavioral standards or demands. Frustration or disappointment is expressed, but this does not meet the legal threshold for defamation or psychological abuse. Narrative strategy risk. Nanoless's public interpretation of this exchange implies deception and manipulation, but fails to acknowledge or quote Red's clarification about exclusivity not being required. This omission supports a case for defamation by implication, framing context-neutral discussion as hostile intent. Conclusion. This screenshot highlights inconsistent messaging but not clear manipulation or gaslighting by legal standards. Red statements reflect branding concerns and poor communication, not malicious control. The framing in Nanoless's public document overstates the legal weight of the interaction and misrepresents the context. Exhibit review screenshot January 15, 2025, 8:52 p.m. Reference context. Red emphasizes that multiple clients dilute the uniqueness of Nanoless's work, reinforcing brand exclusivity without directly demanding it. Theme alleged. Emotional manipulation framed as professional branding. Summary of content. Red communicates that the more people you take on, the less unique your work becomes for me, and goes on to suggest that this isn't an attempt to control but rather a personal stance. Red states it's just a feeling I have, implying this is a personal boundary or brand concern. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. Nanoless claims this was manipulated guilt tripping, that the message was used to make her feel bad without taking on other clients, subtly pressuring her into exclusivity by making her feel that she was harming Sinder's brand by working elsewhere. Objective legal assessment. Framed as opinion, not demand. Red's statement is subjective and framed explicitly as a feeling, not a directive. It does not attempt to compel Nanoless to act, nor does it offer rewards or consequences. Important distinctions when assessing coercion or undue influence. lacks threat or business consequence. There is no statement implying retaliation, business withholding, or cancellation of commissions if Nanoless declines exclusivity. This weakens any claim of undue pressure or coercive manipulation. Industry norm alignment, branding exclusivity, and perceived uniqueness are standard concerns in creative and influencer-driven industries. While emotionally worded, the concern expressed aligns with typical discussions in branding and marketing. Narrative strategy risk. Nanoless publicly framed this message as emotional blackmail. However, the content lacks malicious intent or manipulative demand. The absence of tech context around whether Red was responding to a specific concern or simply venting weakens the accusation. By presenting emotionally vulnerable branding advice as coercion, Nanoless engages in framing by implication, potentially crossing into defamation territory if damages were caused. I didn't think I'd get this far. I'm going to be reading this document. Oh my god. Conclusion. This message reflects subjective branding concern, not manipulation. There is no legal basis to claim this message constitutes coercion, gaslighting, or abuse. Public interpretation exaggerates the tone and downplays the non-directive nature of the communication. Exhibit review screenshot January 15, 2025, 8:55 p.m. Reference context. Red reiterates that while exclusivity was never demanded, Nanoless's increased workload with other creators affects the perceived specialness of her work for Sinder. Theme alleged, soft pressure and guilt-based manipulation. Summary of content. Red opens by saying, I never asked you to be exclusive, you said you wanted to be, immediately distancing himself from any claim of pressure. However, he follows this with a statement that the more work Nanoless takes on, the less special your work becomes, implying emotional impact without asserting control. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. Nanoless presents this message as a continued emotional manipulation, implying Red was subtly guilting her into exclusivity while attempting to maintain plausible deniability by insisting he never directly requested it. Objective legal assessment. Denial of demand is explicit. The message begins with a clear statement rejecting the notion that exclusivity was enforced, which helps negate the claim of manipulation through implied coercion. Expression of emotional impact is not control. Saying it just didn't feel as special anymore is a subjective emotional response, not a professional directive or contractual consequence. Expressing feelings, especially in an artistic or branding context, is not equivalent to manipulation. Tone is soft, not aggressive. There is no hostile language, threats, or attempts to shame. The conversational tone suggests openness, not strategic pressure. No evidence of consequence or retaliation. Red does not follow up with consequences, loss of business, or reprimands, which would be required to substantiate claims of unfair business pressure or professional sabotage. Narrative strategy risk. By framing this as manipulative behavior, Nanoless attributes motive and intent not present in the actual message. The fact that Red insists on the absence of exclusivity demands undercuts the central argument of coercion. Framing this as malicious communication risks mischaracterizing emotionally honest feedback as abusive conduct. Conclusion. Red's message, while emotionally expressive, does not contain manipulative language or coercive intent. It is insufficient to support claims of gaslighting or emotional abuse and reflects a personal view rather than an operational demand. Nanoless's interpretation risks constituting defamation by implication if presented as fact to damage reputation. Exhibit review screenshot April 12, 2025, 11:01 to 11:02 p.m. Reference context. Nanoless and Redacted are discussing a model arrangement. Redacted attempts to redirect blame for recent tension toward a third party, distancing themselves from allegations of unprofessional behavior. The alleged deflection and character comparison targeting a third party. Summary of content. Redacted makes a pointed remark implying that a third party, likely competing VTuber, is behaving unprofessionally by ghosting a collaborator and refusing acknowledgement. This positions Redacted and Nanoless as comparatively reasonable. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. Nanoless may interpret this message as an instance of Red on Sinder's behalf engaging in character attacks to emotionally manipulate her into exclusivity, using third-party negativity to control professional boundaries. Objective legal assessment. Implied identification. Though no name is stated, the phrasing makes the subject of the criticism easily identifiable. Defamation by implication applies even if names are withheld. Statement framed as fact. The language strongly implies factual misconduct, which, if false, could be defamatory. Absence of evidence or clarification. There is no effort to present this as a subjective feeling or to verify its accuracy. Potential malicious intent. If this was designed to isolate Nanoless from third-party work, the implication could be seen as reputational sabotage. Conclusion. This statement introduces reputational harm under the guise of private commentary. While it's informal, the phrasing, timing, and implication may satisfy the threshold for defamation by implication. It strengthens a pattern of emotionally strategic communication intended to isolate Nanoless from competing creators. Exhibit review screenshot May 5, 2025, 1:07:32 a.m. Reference contents. Nanoless includes the screenshot in her public Google document to argue that Sinder and Red spoke ill of other creators behind closed doors. She positions the message as proof of manipulative behavior and toxic workplace dynamics, particularly targeting Bao. Theme alleged, undermining professional relationships, reputational manipulation. Summary of content. In this message, Red expresses frustration about Bao's ongoing use of their shared editor. He states, "It's insane she thinks she can keep sending him things, implying Bao is inconsiderate or overbearing. The tone is aggravated, and the message seems to reflect a moment of private annoyance or stress over workload allocation." Nanoless uses this message to imply Red, and by extension Sinder, are operating in bad faith while maintaining public friendships. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. The accuser, Nanoless, claims that this message is one example among many of Red and Cinder engaging in two-faced behavior, publicly friendly, privately slanderous. It is used to support a broader narrative that Cinder is manipulative, controlling and orchestrating interpersonal sabotage against those in her professional circle. Objective legal assessment. Privately shared, publicly framed. This message was not sent to a public forum and was disclosed by Nanoless to support her claims. The decision to publicly frame a personal grievance without full contextual framing could rise to defamation by implication. Subjective frustration, not a factual accusation. The message shows frustration, not verifiable false claims about Bao. Expressing annoyance over workload demands does not equate to defamation unless paired with falsehood or demonstrable malice. Framing distorts intent. The message does not establish any instruction or attempt to sabotage Bao's reputation. Nanoless presents it alongside broader accusations, exaggerating its significance without offering counterbalancing context. Reputational harm via emotional framing. The negative tone is clear, but the real risk arises from the public interpretation shaped by Nanoless's emotional narrative. This selective disclosure may mislead the audience into believing the defendants are maliciously conspiring, which has material reputational consequences. Conclusion. The content of the screenshots reflects a critical comment, not a campaign of slander. Its inclusion in a defamation case relies heavily on how it was framed, not what it contains. Nanoless's use of this message to paint Cinder and Red as toxic and deceitful appears disproportionate to the message's actual content, thereby supporting a claim of defamation by implication when combined with public narrative strategies. Exhibit Review Screenshot, February 11, 2025, 7:18 p.m. to 10:46 p.m. Reference context. Nanoless communicates directly with Cinder to express regret for backing out of an exclusivity arrangement. She explains that she feels overwhelmed and does not want to be dragged into drama involving other creators. Cinder responds empathetically, acknowledging Nano's feelings and explaining that the exclusivity request partially stemmed from her own emotional response to constant comparisons. The conversation continues with both parties sharing their frustrations, supporting each other, and affirming that they want to continue their working relationship respectfully. Theme alleged. Framing of personal insecurities as professional coercion, potential misrepresentation of tone and intent. Summary of content. This conversation features a candid emotional exchange between Nanoless and Cinder. Nanoless apologizes for stepping back from an exclusivity discussion and clarifies her desire to avoid interpersonal conflict. Cinder in return reveals that the exclusivity concern was rooted in emotional discomfort due to comparisons with other creators, namely Silverveil. The conversation remains civil and collaborative throughout. At no point does Cinder issue demands or threats. She instead expresses vulnerability and reiterates her appreciation for Nano's work. Both parties conclude the exchange with mutual support and understanding. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. Nanoless included the screenshot to support her narrative that Cinder and Red emotionally manipulated her into exclusivity. She presents the dialogue as evidence of pressure to limit professional opportunities and cater to Cinder's emotional needs. Objective legal assessment. Absence of coercive language. The messages from Cinder do not reflect any attempt to compel, control, or pressure Nanoless into professional decisions. Her tone is professional and reflective rather than directive. Framing risks. By presenting this conversation as an example of manipulation, Nanoless may have mischaracterized a mutual emotional exchange. Cinder does not tie Nano's career options to consequences or enforceable conditions. Legal neutrality of emotional disclosure. The act of expressing emotional discomfort about being compared to peers is not in itself defamatory or coercive. Emotional transparency, particularly in personal business relationships, is not legally actionable. Conclusion. This exhibit reflects a mutual and respectful conversation, not manipulative or abusive behavior. Cinder's comments fall within the realm of emotional honesty, not professional misconduct. Presenting this interaction as coercive behavior may constitute misrepresentation by implication, particularly if used to publicly damage reputation without acknowledging the non-threatening tone and substance of the exchange. Exhibit Review Screenshot, February 11, 2025, 10:46 p.m. to 10:49 p.m. Reference context. Nanoless expresses emotional vulnerability and apologizes for revisiting the exclusivity topic. Cinder reassures her, emphasizing care, support, and a desire to continue working together. Both parties acknowledge stress, but the conversation remains rooted in mutual affirmation. Theme alleged. Emotional reassurance following boundary setting, interpreted as pressure by implication. Summary of content. Nanoless opens by acknowledging her mental strain and apologizes to Cinder for bringing up the emotional stress tied to exclusivity. Cinder reciprocates with kindness and emphasizes her support for Nano's financial well-being and happiness. Nano clarifies that she's worried Cinder might hate her for continuing to work with another unnamed party. Cinder empathetically denies this, offering affection and reiterating her desire to continue their creative collaboration. The conversation closes on a note of mutual appreciation. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. Nanoless includes this interaction as a part of a larger pattern of emotional manipulation, suggesting that Cinder's warmth and affirmations were strategic, used to influence her commission decisions without issuing direct demands. Objective legal assessment. Language is emotionally affirming but not directive. Cinder uses expressions like, "I would never hate you," and "I love everything we've done" in response to Nanoless's insecurities, which can be read as emotional support rather than overt manipulation. Possible implicit guilt reinforcement. While not explicit, Cinder's affectionate responses could subtly reinforce emotional stakes, especially when paired with phrases like, "this makes me stressed," which might unintentionally make Nanoless feel responsible for Cinder's well-being. Lacks explicit request or outcome-based pressure. There is no demand for exclusivity or denial of future work based on Nano's choices. Emotional tone initiated by Nanoless. Nano opens the conversation with vulnerability, setting the stage for Cinder's tone. Absence of professional consequence language. No reference is made to canceling work, denying commissions, or blacklisting. Conclusion. While the conversation is emotionally charged, it lacks explicit coercion. The possible emotional dynamic where reassurance from Cinder could be interpreted as subtle guilt tripping is too ambiguous and subjective to meet the standard for manipulative conduct. The exchange reads more as emotional conflict resolution than strategic influence, weakening its probative value in a defamation defense. Exhibit review. Screenshot, November 26, 2023, 3:03 p.m. Reference context: a conversation between Nanoless and Cinder following early discussions with Red about potential exclusivity or reduced collaboration with other creators. Theme alleged: relational guilt, emotional influence, and subtle exclusivity reinforcement. Summary of content. Nanoless opens with an apologetic tone, expressing anxiety about being dragged into interpersonal conflict, and reaffirms her appreciation for Cinder and Red. Cinder responds empathetically, but admits to feeling overshadowed by comparisons with another creator, Silverveil, offering that this was why Red asked Nanoless not to take more work from that creator. The conversation shifts into a discussion of mutual respect and appreciation, with Cinder highlighting her emotional connection to Nano's early work and expressing hope to continue collaborating, though acknowledging it's Nano's choice. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. The accuser frames messages like this as examples of manipulative behavior, where emotional appeals are used to indirectly discourage professional relationships with others. In this view, Cinder's reference to feelings of inferiority in her positioning as a long-term loyal partner serve to guilt Nanoless into staying loyal and exclusive without making a direct demand. Objective legal assessment. Initiating tone is conciliatory, not coercive. Nanoless begins with a soft apology, setting the emotional tone of the exchange. Cinder's response conveys emotional vulnerability, not directive control. She expresses her feelings of being overshadowed and her emotional ties to Nano's work, but stops short of making demands or ultimatums. Statements are affirming and choice-respecting. Cinder explicitly acknowledges that Nano can choose her own collaborators and that her feelings are personal. No enforceable request or contract implied. There is no threat, compensation, negotiation, or formal exclusivity pressure. Emotional undertone may affect decision-making. While not legally manipulative, emotionally charged expressions, e.g. "I always feel in someone's shadows," could have the effect of influencing a decision through empathy or guilt. Conclusion. This exchange centers around emotional honesty, not contractual manipulation. While it is possible that Cinder's message contributed to Nanoless feeling reluctant to work with other creators, the legal bar for manipulation or coercion is not met. The conversation is clearly framed as a mutual discussion between collaborators navigating emotional and professional boundaries. Claims of guilt tripping may hold weight rhetorically, but not legally. Exhibit review. Screenshot, November 25, 2023, 10:46 a.m. Reference context. Nanoless expresses concern that she was expected to drop other model clients in favor of Cinder. She asserts her independence as a freelance artist and sets boundaries about not taking sides in ongoing interpersonal trauma. Red responds by affirming her freedom and states the misunderstanding stemmed from the assumption that increased work with Cinder as was her own preference. Theme alleged: miscommunication over professional boundaries and potential applied exclusivity. Summary of content. Nanoless outlines how her peers believed it's unfair for her to favor Cinder over other clients and expresses her desire to remain independent and apolitical in the VTuber space. She commits to continuing work with Cinder, but not as her exclusive artist. Red immediately clarifies that he was under the impression that more frequent work with Cinder was something Nano wanted, not something she was being pressured into. He explicitly rejects the idea that they were making her do so, and agrees that she should do whatever she wants as a freelance artist. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. Nanoless includes this message to suggest that pressure had been placed on her to act in Cinder's favor to the exclusion of other creators, possibly without her informed agreement. The claim is that emotional social expectations were used to subtly enforce loyalty, and Red's response is interpreted as retroactive damage control. Objective legal assessment. Red's language affirms artistic independence. There is no directive or controlling language. In fact, he enforces that Nano should do as she sees fit. Clarification supports absence of coercion. Red explicitly states he believed increased work was Nano's preference, not an obligation. Tone is reconciliatory and respectful. There is no adversarial tone, threat, or coercive undertone in the exchange. This communication is acknowledged mutually. Both parties agree that the misunderstanding stemmed from unclear assumptions, and no party is accused of acting in bad faith. Lack of professional consequence. There is no mention of withholding work, blacklisting, or retaliation based on Nano's decision to diversify clients. Conclusion. The screenshot illustrates a boundary-setting conversation between a freelance artist and a client, resulting in mutual understanding. Red's comments reflected an effort to respect Nano's professional autonomy and clarify expectations, not to impose exclusivity. As such, this exhibit does not support claims of manipulation or coercion, and instead undermines the broader accusation of forced loyalty. Exhibit review screenshot November 25, 2023, 10:54 a.m. Reference context. Red responds to a misunderstanding, clarifying that his previous comments were emotional reflections rather than a directive that Nanoless should exclusively work with Sinder. Theme alleged. Implied exclusivity and emotional manipulation through value framing. Summary of context. Red explains that while he did express that Nano's work feels as special when shared with others, this was not a command or requirement for exclusivity. He reiterates that his comments were not meant to obligate Nano to work solely with Sinder. He apologizes for any misunderstanding and promises to keep discussions more business-like going forward. Nanoless responds defensively, emphasizing that every model she creates is unique and she doesn't want her intent or loyalty to be misunderstood. Red affirms her work and offers reassurance. Nanoless's claim as publicly stated. Nanoless includes this as evidence of how emotional language was used to pressure her into exclusivity. The focus is on Red's repeated use of specialness as a qualitative judgment that could implicitly influence her decisions even while claiming to support her autonomy. Objective legal assessment. Red issues a direct denial of intent to coerce. He clearly states, I wasn't saying you had to only I wasn't saying you had to only do Sinder work from now on, negating any suggestion of a directive. Expression of feelings versus enforcement. Saying something feels less special is an emotional reaction, not a professional boundary or rule. Tone is apologetic and conciliatory. Red apologizes multiple times and commits to adjusting future communications. Acknowledgement of misunderstanding. Red accepts that the miscommunication caused stress and reiterates that exclusivity was not demanded. Nano's defensive reaction shows sensitivity, not proof of pressure. Her emotional reaction may demonstrate internalized pressure, but not that Red enforced it or leveraged power over her work. Conclusion. This exchange reflects an attempt to resolve a miscommunication, with Red clarifying that he did not impose exclusivity and apologizing for any unintended emotional pressure. While Nanoless may have perceived a manipulative text, the language used does not support claims of intentional coercion or professional misconduct. Exhibit review screenshot November 25, 2023, 11 a.m. Reference context. Red responds to Nanoless's concerns about working with multiple clients, expressing support and encouraging transparency while maintaining a business-focused tone. Theme alleged, transactional framing and subtle reinforcement of exclusivity expectations. Summary of content. Red reassures Nanoless that he understands her desire to expand her client base and acknowledges her growing reputation. He expresses that they may need to reschedule planned projects depending on her availability. Nanoless responds with gratitude, clarifying that she still enjoys working with Red and Sinder and intends to revisit her commitments. Red replies with business is business, suggesting that they can move forward based on what works logistically and contractually. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. Nanoless presents this message as part of a pattern in which Red frames her availability in a business-like manner, but subtly maintains pressure to prioritize Sinder. The remark about needing to replan and the repeated emphasis on business are interpreted as reminders that any deviation could affect future work opportunities. Objective legal assessment. Red affirms professional respect. He compliments Nanoless's talent and avoids any accusatory or possessive language. No exclusivity demand present. There is no direct or implied request that Nano should stop working with others. Business tone is neutral and typical. The use of business is common in industry conversations and lacks coercive undertone. Nanoless's tone is appreciative, not defensive. She shows no sign of feeling threatened or emotionally manipulated in this exchange. Project delays framed as practical, not punitive. Replanning is conditional upon scheduling, not contingent on exclusivity. Conclusion. This exchange reflects a professionally neutral discussion about workflow and scheduling. There is no evidence of coercion, defamation, or pressure. While it is part of a broader conversation about exclusivity, this message alone reinforces mutual respect and autonomy. Exhibit review screenshot November 25, 2023, 11:10 a.m. Reference context. Nanoless expresses concern about accepting a new commission from another VTuber, worried it might be perceived as disrespectful to Sinder due to their complicated history. Red responds by reaffirming that Nanoless is a freelance artist and free to take on work from others, emphasizing business as business. Theme alleged, perceived emotional manipulation masks as professional neutrality. Summary of content. Nanoless struggles with whether to take on another commission due to implied expectations from Sinder's circle. Red responds by reiterating that Nanoless is free to take jobs as she pleases, while also subtly reinforcing the professional link between Sinder and the unnamed other VTuber, which is Silverveil, I'm pretty sure. The tone is calm and logistical, yet Nanoless's internal conflict expressed publicly after the screenshot was released frames this interaction as an example of manipulation where support is offered in words but paired with undercurrents of indirect pressure to avoid conflict or disloyalty. Nanoless's claim is publicly stated. Nanoless later described this exchange as part of a pattern of subtle manipulation where Red and Sinder created an environment where she felt unable to take other jobs freely without risking emotional fallout or professional tension. Though no command was given, she interpreted the interaction as loaded with unspoken expectations. Objective legal assessment. No explicit restriction or demand. Red states clearly that Nanoless is free to work with others. Message tone is neutral and professional. The reply is calm and lacks accusatory or pressuring language. No provable defamation content. No false claims are made about any third party, and the message doesn't contain anything defamatory on its face. Conclusion. Although Nanoless publicly framed this conversation as emotionally manipulative, the text alone lacks the characteristics of coercion or slander. The message may contribute to a broader emotional pattern Nanoless alleges, but on its own it demonstrates professional courtesy and deference to her autonomy. The defendant's interpretation relies on implication rather than textual evidence of wrongdoing. Exhibit review screenshot November 25, 2023, 11:30 a.m. Reference context. Following earlier discussion about Nanoless's discomfort with exclusivity, this message continues the conversation around her cancellations of other commissions. Red appears to seek reassurance that Nanoless didn't cite Sinder as the reason and reiterates that there was never an intention to coerce her into exclusivity. Theme alleged denial of pressure following private emotional influence. Summary of content. Nanoless clarifies that she cited health reasons when canceling commissions and did not blame Sinder or Red. Red responds with apparent humor and reassures her that they never meant to imply she was being forced into exclusivity. The message closes with an apology for any miscommunication. While the tone is friendly, the underlying subtext reveals a dynamic where Nanoless feels compelled to withhold the true cause of her cancellations from others, protecting Sinder's image and reputation. This screenshot was shared publicly by Nanoless as supporting evidence of her feeling manipulated into prioritizing Sinder without overt instruction to do so. Nanoless's claim. Nanoless presents this image as evidence of emotional manipulation, implying that while Red and Sinder claim not to be exerting control, the conversation still led her to make professional sacrifices and conceal the real reasons for doing so. She implies that the pressure was indirect but real, resulting in self-censorship and internal conflict. Objective legal assessment. Clear denial of coercion. Red explicitly states the intent was not to force or convince her, which weakens any direct claim of manipulation. Apology and clarification. The message includes multiple affirmations of respect for Nanoless's autonomy and attempts to clear up past miscommunications. Evidence of discomfort, not wrongdoing. The screenshot supports a narrative of emotional difficulty but does not contain evidence of coercion, harassment, or defamation. Conclusion. This message demonstrates a complex interpersonal dynamic with Nanoless feeling stressed and Red attempting to clarify and de-escalate. While the emotional burden Nanoless experienced may be valid, this particular exchange does not substantiate claims of manipulation or wrongdoing on Red's part. Exhibit review screenshot, timestamp not visible. Reference context. Nanoless shared this screenshot publicly, using it to support her claim that Red and Sinder emotionally manipulated her into prioritizing exclusivity with them over other clients. Theme alleged, framing exclusivity as emotional dependence or possessiveness. Summary of content. In this message, Red expresses disappointment that Nanoless is taking on a work outside of their arrangement. The phrase "we thought it was special" appears to reflect a personal or emotional sentiment rather than a directive or policy. Nanoless's claim. Nanoless interprets and presents this message as an example of subtle emotional manipulation, suggesting that Red used guilt and emotional appeals to restrict her freedom as an artist. Objective legal assessment. The language is emotionally expressive but not coercive. There are no direct requests for exclusivity or threats of consequence. "We thought it was special" functions as a subjective statement, not a demand or directive. No indication that this message created or enforced a binding exclusivity arrangement. The public use of this message as definitive evidence of emotional abuse or manipulation risks misrepresenting the original intent and could form part of a defamatory implication if viewed as a factual allegation. Conclusion. The message conveys disappointment, not manipulation, framing it as coercive in a public context when no operational threat or pressure exists. Misrepresents the interaction. This creates a legal vulnerability for defamation by implication if it materially harms the reputation of Sinder or Red. Exhibit review screenshot July 19, 2023, 12:46 p.m. Reference context. Red discusses the perceived rivalry between Sinder and another unnamed VTuber. This message was later shared publicly by Nanoless as part of a larger narrative alleging toxic behavior behind the scenes. Theme alleged: inferred hostility and competitive targeting. Summary of content. Red speculates that the lack of acknowledgement between Sinder and the unnamed VTuber stems from an unspoken competition, suggesting that public comparisons have created tensions. He notes that Sinder's success in such a short time might be interpreted by others as her replacing or copying the other creator, and implies this may be why the VTuber avoids publicly acknowledging Sinder. Nanoless's claim. Nanoless used this message to imply that Sinder read, foster, or encourage rivalry with other creators, especially by framing them as competitors or replacements and contributing to division in the VTuber community. Objective legal assessment. This is a speculative commentary, not a statement of fact or directed action. Red does not claim Sinder feels this way directly, but attempts to interpret the unnamed VTuber's perspective. There is no direct to sabotage, blacklist, or interfere with another creator's career. The message could be seen as gossip, but it does not meet the threshold for defamatory content unless falsely framed as a factual allegation. Sharing this message as evidence of toxic plotting overstates its implications and introduces risk of defamation by implication if framed as intentional antagonism. Conclusion. The message expresses personal speculation on a perceived interpersonal conflict and lacks any coercive language on its face. While it may be interpreted as tone-deaf or petty, it does not constitute strong evidence of malicious intent or slanderous behavior. Use of this message to support broader allegations of defamation are valid. Exhibit review. A screenshot July 19, 2023 till 51 p.m. Reference context. Red continues discussing perceived rivalry between Sinder and another VTuber, expanding on ideas of recognition and competitive mimicry. This message was shared by Nanoless to support claims of antagonistic behavior and suggested surveillance or imitation. Theme alleged: accusation of competitive monitoring and implied sabotage. Summary of content. Red states that Sinder deserves to be recognized for her own merits and expresses frustration that the unnamed VTuber will not acknowledge her. He emphasizes the potential business benefits of collaboration, but pivots to accuse the other creator of mimicking features from Sinder's stream. As an example, Red describes a figure animation feature supposedly debuted by Sinder, followed shortly by the other VTuber using the same feature, suggesting intentional imitation. Nanoless's claim. Nanoless referred this image to support her claim that Sinder and Red foster a hostile narrative about other creators and frame common streaming developments as deliberate copying or threats, painting others as antagonists without justification. Objective legal assessment. The message expresses strong opinion and speculation but contains no factual accusations of wrongdoing or misconduct. Red's statements imply a belief in imitation but provide no verifiable evidence beyond coincidental timing. There is no direct call to action, no defamatory labeling, and no assertion that the other VTuber actually stole content or ideas. This can be viewed as emotionally reactive commentary rather than a factual claim intended to harm reputation. If presented as a strategic effort to smear or defame the other VTuber, its evidentiary weight is weak and risks overstating intent. Conclusion. This message expresses subjective frustration and perceived rivalry, but does not rise to the level of Nanoless's claims. That's a typo. However, the tone may support a claim of interpersonal tension. Exhibit review screenshot May 10, 2023, 4:14 a.m. Reference context. Red discusses alleged mimicry by an unnamed VTuber asserting that his creator adopted design and branding elements similar to Sinder's after unfollowing her. This message was used by Nanoless to reinforce claims that Red and Sinder consistently framed other creators in a negative accusatory light. Theme alleged: sustaining defamation via accusations of idea theft and rebranding mimicry. Summary of content. Red accuses the other VTuber of adopting visual elements associated with Sinder, such as flames and the fire Cerberus imagery. Oh, spite. After previously not using them, and claims this occurred shortly after she unfollowed Sinder on Twitter, he implies a calculated shift in branding to resemble Sinder, mocking her rebranding and using dismissive language like SMH and whatever her lore says she is. He then references social media activity, including tweets that supposedly deny copying, and claims targeted fan behavior on Sinder's content that seemed to passively criticize the unnamed VTuber. Nanoless's claim. Nanoless presents this exchange as evidence that Red fosters and spreads a hostile narrative that paints Sinder's peers, particularly those with overlapping themes, as copycats, thus defaming their originality and professional integrity. Objective legal analysis. The message heavily relies on opinion and interpretation of timing, emojis, and branding trends. There is no factual proof of copying or theft. Language like "never did that before" and "used to call herself" suggests speculative commentary, not verifiable misconduct. No explicit false statement of fact is made. Claims of mimicry are implied rather than outright declared as truth. The mention of fan behavior is indirect and not shown to be coordinated or incited by Red or Sinder. While the message may fuel interpersonal drama, it does not by itself fulfill the legal standard for defamation. Conclusion. Though emotionally charged and potentially disparaging, the message contains no demonstrably false factual claims and does not assign direct malicious intent. It falls within the category of speculative commentary and informal frustration. If this is used to support a Nanoless's claims, it may appear as exaggeration without substantiated harm. Final conclusion. In the exhibits analyzed, Nanoless publicly presents a series of private messages involving Sinder and her manager, read as evidence of manipulation, sabotage, and toxic conduct. These posts form the basis of public claims that Red and Sinder pressured her into exclusivity, disparaged other creators behind their backs, and guilt-tripped her into withdrawing from other business relationships. However, upon closer review of the screenshots themselves, most of the messages do not substantiate the more severe allegations being made. Red's messages frequently reflect emotional, speculative, and subjective commentary. While at times they display unprofessional tone, interpersonal frustration, or pressure-related suggestions, they do not, in isolation, constitute hard proof of malicious coordination, contractual coercion, or slanderous conspiracy. The examples cited as manipulative or controlling are often undercut by disclaimers, e.g., you're a free artist, we never told you to do that. Emotionally charged but non-actionable business preferences, e.g., we need it, we feel it makes your work less special, or personal venting. Moreover, no explicit threats, enforced punishments, or reputational smearing of Nanoless herself are present. These omissions critically weaken the foundation of any claim that this private dialogue constituted abusive or defamatory treatment of Nanoless. Given that Nanoless made public claims of long-term manipulation and reputational harm, and directly used these screenshots as a primary proof, this raises the question of defamation by implication. When a party publishes private communications while attaching narrative interpretations that cannot be objectively supported by the content itself, it may create a false light that damages the reputation of those involved. Particularly damaging are claims that these individuals were sabotaging, blacklisting, or actively undermining others. Claims not explicitly supported in the cited messages. While Nanoless may have genuinely perceived certain interactions as manipulative, personal perception is not a shield against defamation if the claims made publicly imply intent, malice, or facts that are not demonstrable from the material. As such, the risk of successful defamation litigation by Sinder depends on A, how Nanoless's public framing deviated from the literal content of these messages, and B, whether the reputational damage of Sinder and Red was material and traceable to those public claims. Full analysis of Bao's claims. Section Introduction. Bao. As established in the analysis of Nanoless's statements and supporting evidence, a comprehensive legal review has already been conducted regarding the content and implications of the screenshots and communications she made public. Therefore, any claims presented by Bao that rely solely on repeating, referencing, or recontextualizing information sourced from Nanoless will not be reassessed here. Instead, this section will focus exclusively on analyzing Bao's own statements, direct claims, and any original evidence she provides. Only material directly traceable to Bao's authorship, interaction, or publication will be evaluated for its potential contribution to a defamation case or reputational harm. This ensures a clean separation of evidentiary responsibility and avoids redundancy in the legal review. Exhibit review. Screenshot. September 3 to 4, 2023, 10:29 p.m. and 9:30 a.m. Reference context. This is a screenshot of an email exchange between Bao's management and Kaiser, a video editor known to be affiliated with Sinder. Bao is initiating contact after seeing Kaiser's editing work on a stream featuring her and Sinder. Theme alleged: claimed editor poaching or undermining of Sinder's business connections. Summary of content. Bao's email expresses admiration for Kaiser's editing style and requests occasional work from him. She clarifies how she discovered him via a video of her own stream with Sinder, and includes her Discord handle to continue the conversation. Kaiser's reply is friendly and open, stating he would love to edit for her and has sent a Discord friend request. Bao's claim. Bao presents this email as proof that she approached Kaiser professionally and transparently. Contrary to any suggestion that she was poaching Sinder's editor or working behind her back, it is used to refute the claim allegedly made by Sinder and redacted that she hijacked Kaiser. Objective legal assessment. No evidence of malicious intent. The tone and content of Bao's message is courteous and businesslike. There is no indication of pressure, secrecy, or manipulation. Contact originates from shared work. Bao references a co-stream with Sinder as the origin of her discovery of Kaiser, indicating the connection was public-facing and not a result of private snooping. Kaiser's consent is clear. His enthusiastic reply undermines any assertion that he was coerced or improperly recruited. Lack of exclusivity or prior conflict. There is no mention of exclusivity in Kaiser's response. If Bao was unaware of any exclusivity agreement and no such term was publicly disclosed, her inquiry remains professionally reasonable. Conclusion. This email exchange does not support the claim that Bao acted inappropriately with regard to Kaiser's editorial services. Instead, it demonstrates a standard client inquiry and a willing response. Exhibit review screenshot March 2025, 8:32 p.m. Reference context: Bao included this image as part of her defense against claims made by Sinder in Redacted regarding her alleged interference with Sinder's business relationships, specifically with Kaiser, the editor. Bao previously stated that during this call, Kaiser personally expressed concerns about exclusivity negotiations with Sinder. Theme alleged: corroborative evidence of a professional conversation justifying Bao's editorial conduct. Summary of content: the image is a simple Discord system message indicating that Bao initiated a voice call that lasted 5 hours on the evening of March 20, 2025. No audio or transcript is provided. In her statement, Bao references the call to support her claim that Kaiser independently shared concerns about exclusivity and that she encouraged him to take the opportunity with Sinder, not interfere with it. Bao's claim: Bao uses the image to substantiate the timeline of events and to imply that private discussions during this call would contradict Redacted's narrative that she manipulated Kaiser away from Sinder. She argues this demonstrates her support for his decision to accept exclusive work with Sinder, thus opposing the accusation of sabotage. Objective legal assessment: evidence is circumstantial. The image confirms that a call occurred, but it offers no insight into the content, tone, or participants of the discussion, which, by the way, Jun Mitsui, Bao's channel manager, and Sakurabor were in the call, and they corroborated, so yeah, that there is witnesses that attest that it happened. But anyway, relevance depends on supporting testimony. Bao's narrative assigns meaning to the call, but without logs, recordings, or corroboration from others present, the call's value as evidence remains limited, not proof of intent or conduct. The existence of a long call may suggest a serious or emotional conversation took place, but it does not confirm or deny any of the alleged behavior regarding editorial exclusivity or manipulation. Conclusion: this screenshot verifies a call occurred, which supports the timeline Bao outlines in her narrative. However, standing alone, it cannot serve as proof of her innocence or Redacted's alleged misconduct. Its value depends entirely on how credibly it supports a broader chain of contextual or testimonial evidence, which Jun Mitsui and Sakamura said they were on the call and they said that stuff happened. So the whole exclusivity talk with Kaiser, between her and Kaiser, yeah, that happened. Apparently, according to Jun Mitsui and Sakamura. Anyway. Exhibit review screenshot, August 29, 2023, 11:12 p.m. Reference context: Bao presents this screenshot to demonstrate the professional relationship she established with Sakamura, Sak, a video editor she claims began working with her long before the controversy involving Sinder and Redacted. This message is used to counter allegations that she stole Sak from their network. Theme alleged: pre-established client relationship to refute accusations of professional poaching. Summary of content: the Discord message shows Bao reaching out to Sakamura, complimenting his previous work and expressing interest in commissioning a video similar to the Bao Experience one. She asks for his rates and turnaround time. Sak responds positively, saying, "Yo, all good." This message serves to document the initial commissioning conversation between them. Bao's claim: Bao uses this image to rebut the claim made by Redacted and Sinder that she poached Sak away from their professional circle. She asserts this conversation proves her working relationship with Sak was self-initiated and amicable from the beginning, rather than the result of interference or manipulation. Objective legal assessment establishes timeline. The timestamp on the message clearly situates Bao's outreach in August 2023, showing she initiated contact long before later exclusivity arrangements with Sak. No evidence of misconduct. The conversation is professional and respectful. There is no suggestion of coercion, pressure, or intent to exclude other clients. Supports Bao's narrative of early collaboration. The exchange demonstrates the existence of an organic, mutually interested working relationship between Bao and Sak prior to any accusations of interference by Sinder or Redacted. Conclusion: this image supports Bao's defense that her collaboration with Sak was established independently and transparently. He counters claims that she undermined Sinder's or Redacted's relationship with Sak and shows no sign of improper intent or behavior. Exhibit review screenshot December 8, 2024, 10:45 to 10:46 p.m. Reference context: this Discord message exchange shows Sakamura, Bao's longtime video animator, shows Sakamura, Sak, Bao's longtime video animator, expressing a desire to transition into being an in-house editor for Bao only following completion of his final public commission. It was submitted by Bao in response to accusations that he had locked up Sak and prevented others, including Sinder, from working with him. A theme alleged, refuting that claim that Bao manipulator coerced Sak into exclusivity and showing that his decision was self-motivated. Summary of content: Sak asks Bepis, Bao's manager, whether it's okay to stop receiving public credit for his work moving forward. He then explains he prefers to function as an in-house animator for Bao after completing one final commission for another client, adding that he wants to focus on his own brand and reduce client work in the coming year. There is no indication of pressure or interference by Bao. Bao's claim: Sinder has alleged via statements from Nanoless and other leaks that Bao purposely blocked Sak from working with them again, potentially even coercing exclusivity. This image was released by Bao to counter such narratives and establish that Sak's exclusivity was self-directed. Objective legal assessment: SAC initiates exclusivity. SAC clearly states that this is his decision and refers to future plans for personal growth, not contractual obligation or pressure. No mention of Bao's influence, the tone of the message is voluntary and forward-looking. There's no indication that Bao requested this arrangement nor that SAC was pressured into it. Professional autonomy evident. SAC's desire to stop accepting public credit and pursue his own creative brand suggests professional independence, not manipulation or sabotage. Directly refutes accusation of lock-in. The exhibit shows no evidence that Bao prevented SAC from working with others. Instead, it confirms his intent to stop freelancing altogether except for her. Conclusion. This message from SAC shows a personal independent decision to become exclusive to Bao and withdraw from other commissions. It does not support the claim that Bao manipulated or locked up SAC. Conclusion. After a thorough examination of Bao's statements, live stream commentary, and public document, it becomes evident that much of her narrative is inextricably linked to the claims and framing established by Nanoless. While Bao presents her position as a personal response to betrayal, her argument leans heavily on emotionally charged language and an uncritical acceptance of Nanoless's interpretation of events. Throughout her published material, Bao does not offer any substantive, independently verifiable evidence to support her claims of manipulation or sabotage. Instead, her arguments revolve around presumed intent, emotional recollection, and reactionary conclusions drawn from private correspondence that lack full context. Her reliance on phrases like "she manipulated me" and "she sabotaged my career" shifts subjective emotional reactions into assertions of fact, an approach that, when broadcast to a wide public audience, introduces risk of defamation by implication. Furthermore, Bao's decision to frame the conflict publicly in tandem with Mischaracterization implicates her in the Bao-Shylily Paradox, a pattern of behavior that demonstrates forethought, coordination, and the strategic use of public sentiment to alleviate a grievance into a moral accusation. By amplifying potentially defamatory claims without independently verifying or clarifying the information upon which those claims are based, Bao may have contributed to reputational damage under the guise of emotional transparency. While emotional pain and interpersonal fallout are not invalid, the way Bao translated these into sweeping public allegations framed as factual and amplified it to a wide audience poses significant legal risks in the absence of conclusive evidence. Her actions may satisfy the legal threshold for reckless disregard for the truth, particularly when viewed alongside the broader pattern of conduct shared by the defendants. Oh no. Here it is. Yes? Okay, there we go. Full analysis of Shylily's claims. Introduction to analysis of Shylily's claims. In the ongoing legal context surrounding the defamation case filed by Sinder, this section will specifically analyze the claims made by Shylily regarding Sinder's behavior. These claims, which are rooted in Nanoless's narrative, assert that Sinder's actions amounted to manipulation, betrayal, professional sabotage, and narcissistic behavior. Shylily's public statements have been presented as fact as part of a larger effort to frame Sinder in a negative light, relying heavily on evidence provided by Nanoless. Given the significance of Nanoless's evidence in shaping Shylily's accusations, it is critical to evaluate the accuracy, content, and intent behind these claims. The Bao-Shylily Paradox, the idea that Shylily and Bao, whether consciously or unconsciously, strategically utilize emotional language and selective evidence, will also be considered as a part of the analysis. This paradox highlights the intentionality behind their statements, as their accusations appear to be calculated and framed for public consumption rather than spontaneous emotional reactions. This analysis will examine Shylily's specific statements, compare them to the evidence presented by Nanoless, and assess whether they constitute defamation by implication, considering the subjective interpretation, selective evidence, and emotional bias in their claims. By doing so, we will determine whether these claims cross the line into reputational harm, or whether they remain within the bounds of protected opinion. Exhibit review: accusations of manipulation and gaslighting. Shylily claimed that Sinder's behavior was manipulative and gaslighting, even her apology. Connection to Nanoless's claims. Nanoless claims about Sinder, particularly involving manipulation and gaslighting, formed the basis of Shylily's statements. However, as previously established, Nanoless's evidence was heavily selective and often lacked full context. Many of the screenshots presented by Nanoless were emotionally charged and failed to provide neutral evidence. They were interpreted through a subjective lens without corroboration. Legal assessment. The accusation of manipulation and gaslighting is potentially defamatory because it directly impacts Sinder's reputation, accusing her of unethical and damaging behavior. However, since the evidence from Nanoless was flawed and Shylily was relying on those claims without critically examining their full context, her statements could be seen as defamation by implication. She repeated and expanded on Nanoless's unverified claims, giving them weight and damaging Sinder's reputation based on what could amount to false or misrepresented information. Exhibit review: claims of betrayal and emotional harm. Shylily's claim Shylily described how Sinder's actions caused her emotional harm and betrayal, claiming that Sinder's actions were deeply hurtful. Connection to Nanoless's claims. This claim is once again grounded in Nanoless's interpretation of Sinder's actions, which were framed in an emotionally negative light as previously analyzed. Nanoless's selective presentation of evidence, such as private messages without full context, likely colored Shylily's perception of Sinder's actions as betraying her trust. Legal assessment. While emotional harm can be valid, it lacks the factual basis required for defamation if it is based on misinterpreted or incomplete information. Shylily's emotional distress, while understandable, hinges on the assumption that Sinder's behavior was manipulative. Based on flawed evidence from Nanoless, the subjective emotional response does not meet the threshold for actionable defamation unless it can be proven that the information was false and presented with reckless disregard for the truth. Exhibit review. Allegations of professional sabotage. Shylily's claim, Shylily accused Sinder of intentionally sabotaging her professional endeavors by undermining her relationships with editors and collaborators. Connection to Nanoless's claims. This accusation is rooted in the same selective evidence provided by Nanoless regarding the interactions between Sinder, Red, and other creators. Nanoless's screenshots were presented as evidence of professional sabotage, yet they lack context and were framed to suggest intentional harm. Legal assessment. The claim of professional sabotage is more factual and actionable than emotional harm. If the evidence is inaccurate or misrepresented, Shylily's statements could be defamatory, as they make direct, harmful allegations about Sinder's professional integrity. The absence of full context in Nanoless's original evidence and Shylily's reliance on it weakens the validity of this claim. Exhibit review characterization of narcissistic behavior. Shylily's claim. Shylily accused Sinder of narcissism and selfishness, suggesting that her actions were driven by self-interest and a lack of accountability. Connection to Nanoless's claims. Again, Nanoless's intentional framing of Sinder's behavior played a significant role in shaping this narrative. Narcissism as an accusation is inherently subjective and reflects Shylily's personal feelings rather than the objective fact. Nanoless's evidence provided a basis for Shylily's characterization, but was emotionally biased and lacked clear objective proof of the behavior she was accusing Sinder of. Legal assessment. Narcissism is a label is subjective and typically protected as opinion rather than fact. However, when such opinions are based on false or misleading evidence, they can contribute to defamation by implication if they damage the person's reputation in the eyes of the public. Shylily's claims about Sinder's narcissistic behavior built on misleading evidence from Nanoless risk unfairly damaging Sinder's personal and professional reputation. Conclusion. Shylily's statements regarding Sinder are heavily intertwined with Nanoless's claims, which were based on incomplete and emotionally charged evidence. The reliance on Nanoless's unverified screenshots without proper context or corroboration makes these statements highly questionable from a legal perspective. Defamation by implication. Given that Shylily's claims were based on misleading or incomplete evidence from Nanoless, these statements may be considered defamatory by implication. By framing these claims as truths, Shylily risks damaging Sinder's reputation without the necessary factual foundation. Malice and negligence. The coordinated nature of the narrative pushed by Shylily, Bao, and Nanoless, coupled with their emotional framing, raises concerns of malice or negligence. If they knew or should have known the claims were misleading or false, their actions could meet the threshold for defamation. Shylily's role in amplifying Nanoless's claims without additional objective evidence makes her statements legally suspect. The subjectivity of her claims, especially in the absence of direct proof, opens her to potential legal consequences should Sinder choose to pursue a defamation case. Logical inconsistencies. Introduction. A high-profile disputes where public perception matters as much as, if not more than, truth. Logical consistency becomes a key indicator of credibility. In the ongoing situation involving Sinder, Bao, Shylily, and Nanoless, the public-facing narratives have largely been shaped by emotionally charged declarations, selectively framed evidence, and moral appeals. This section analyzes those narratives through a legal-adjacent, logic-based framework. It does not attempt to invalidate emotional responses, but rather to evaluate whether such responses have been used to justify public accusations that lack evidentiary rigor. Specifically, we examine how contradictions, paradoxes, and rhetorical choices in their statements may undermine their credibility or point to a degree of forethought that changes the moral and legal weight of their actions. Nanoless. Overview. This section focuses on Nanoless's public statements, evidence presentation, and behavioral patterns during the controversy, examining them for inconsistencies, unsupported claims, or logical issues. While Nanoless's role as the originator of the grievances sets the stage for the broader fallout, it is essential to treat her claims with the same scrutiny as the rest of the accusers. This section aims to determine whether her evidence supports her conclusions or whether her framing contributed to an imbalanced narrative. 1. Role as primary accuser. Nanoless was the first to publish a written document detailing her grievances against Sinder. Her statement was positioned as neutral, but it framed Sinder's conduct in terms of emotional exploitation and operational coercion. The document included screenshots that were interpreted emotionally but lacked broader context to validate intent. 2. Conflation of communication and coercion. Many of the messages shown between her and Sinder were framed as manipulative despite reading as typical negotiation or scheduling conversations. Phrases such as, "we just want to be heard," were accompanied by veiled accusations of overwork and exclusivity presented without firm corroboration. 3. Logical contradictions and framing. Nanoless's public document frames herself as emotionally distressed, yet claims she was unaware of how serious the exclusivity expectations had become. At the same time, she admits to continuing work under the same structure, which implies either consent or avoidance of confrontation. This contradiction, expressing emotional harm while continuing professional collaboration, raises the question of delayed reaction for strategic timing. 4. Emotional versus operational misframing. Much of Nanoless's framing implies emotional exhaustion or discomfort, but the specific issues raised are business-oriented, e.g. work scheduling, artistic availability, or exclusivity preferences. This blurring of emotional and operational lines weakens the clarity of the accusations and may have contributed to public misinterpretation of intent. Conclusion. Nanoless's statements and evidence lack the clarity, separation of concerns, and legal structure necessary to support the accusations she made. While emotional distress should not be dismissed, it is not a legal or logical substitute for demonstrable wrongdoing. Her role as the catalyst for the controversy places her accountability into greater focus, particularly when her framing directly enabled reputational harm based on speculative or interpretative evidence. Now, logical inconsistencies and strategic framing. Overview. This section addresses Bao's role in the public controversy and the logical inconsistencies present in her livestream, written statement, and overall presentation of events. While she positions herself as both emotionally affected and morally upright, her rhetoric and timing suggest calculated positioning more than spontaneous honesty. This is particularly significant when considering the broader coordination and the framing techniques used to characterize Sinder as malicious. 1. Strategic timing versus emotional framing. Bao presented her livestream after Nanoless's statement and in coordination with Shylily contributing to a cascading narrative. Her decision to delay her public response while privately coordinating with other parties suggests premeditation rather than reactionary emotional expression. Despite this, she framed the stream as emotionally overwhelming and unscripted, which conflicts with the preparation implied by the structure and alignment. 2. The Bao-Shylily Paradox. Bao consistently referred to Sinder as a close friend while releasing emotionally charged accusations publicly. If she viewed Sinder as a friend, then the public release was done with full knowledge that reputational harm would occur, a contradiction to claims of innocence. If Bao viewed Sinder as primarily a business partner, then her language, tone, and emotional appeals served to disguise strategic sabotage as personal grief. 3. Mischaracterization of business discussions. Much of the evidence Bao cited included internal operational messages or general project discussions interpreted as manipulative. The leap from speculative or strategic commentary to claims of psychological manipulation is unsupported by the material she shared. Her framing paints Sinder's intent as malicious, despite no definitive statements to that effect being provided. 4. Incomplete or one-sided context. Bao chose to present messages that lack full chronological context, which is essential when making claims of manipulation or coercion. She emphasized emotional impact over legal or operational grounding, shifting the audience's focus from facts to sympathy. Conclusion. Bao's involvement in the controversy is riddled with logical inconsistencies, particularly in how she framed the narrative to blend emotional vulnerability with reputational condemnation. Her actions display either a serious lack of judgment in conflating business and personal boundaries, or calculated framing aimed at weaponizing public perception. In either case, her conduct warrants scrutiny and undermines the credibility of her accusations from a legal and logical standpoint. Shylily, ? Overview. This section focuses on the logical inconsistencies present in Shylily's public commentary, live stream statements, and a reinforcement of the accusations presented by Bao and Nanoless. Shylily's framing often conflated emotional betrayal with professional misconduct, creating a layered paradox between her claimed intentions and her strategic actions. As with the other accusers, her conduct is analyzed here through the lens of reputational harm, intent, and evidentiary coherence. 1. Conflation of emotional harm with operational conduct. Shylily repeatedly used emotionally charged language such as manipulation and gaslighting while referring to the behavior that, based on available material, amounted to unprofessional business management. Her framing blurs standard business disagreements or poor communication with psychological abuse, despite offering little to no clinical or behavioral evidence. 2. Participation in the Bao-Shylily Paradox. Like Bao, Shylily positions herself as a close friend of Sinder. This framing implies a moral obligation to handle conflict privately, which she knowingly violated. If she viewed Sinder as a friend, then going public reflects intentional disregard for the reputational harm it would cause. If she viewed Sinder primarily as a business figure, then her statements function as reputational damage disguised as moral transparency. 3. Public reinforcement without clarification. Shylily doubled down on her claims even after Sinder publicly denied involvement in Red's conduct, refusing to clarify or moderate the accusations. This maintained the narrative that Sinder and Red were acting in unison, ignoring the plausible deniability that had been raised. 4. Use of guilt framing and strategy. Shylily used emotional persuasive language not just to share personal pain, but to implicitly condemn Sinder without legal framing or evidentiary grounding. Her stream contained moments where feelings were asserted as truths, bypassing objective analysis and encouraging emotional dogpiling. Conclusion. Shylily's participation in the controversy, which couched in personal hurt, displays a range of logical inconsistencies. From conflating business dynamics with emotional betrayal to reinforcing unverified narratives, her role appears less about resolution and more about moral positioning. Whether intentional or due to neglect, her actions had consequences that suggest a breach in responsible discourse and raise the possibility of reputational harm under a veil of emotional honesty. Section conclusion. While Bao-Shylily and Nanoless each position themselves as victims of emotional and professional harm, the logical breakdown of their narratives shows a pattern of inconsistencies, selective framing, and coordinated messaging. These issues complicate the moral clarity they present. Whether they intended it or not, their public behavior, timed responses, emotional appeals, and omission of full context created a narrative that appears less like an honest reckoning and more like a reputational attack. The Bao-Shylily Paradox stands as a core example. If their actions were rooted in friendship, they knowingly caused harm. If in business, their moral positioning becomes a strategic deflection. These logical fractures demand greater scrutiny, not only for the sake of fairness to the accused, but to maintain the standards of accountability they claim to defend. Intent and harm assessment. Purpose of section. This section aims to assess the likely intent behind the actions of Bao-Shylily and Nanoless, as well as the demonstrable and potential harm their actions inflicted upon Sinder. While the legal threshold for proving intent can be high, a consistent pattern of conduct combined with predictable consequences and prior knowledge may suffice to argue malicious or negligent behavior. We will distinguish between potential malice, strategic framing, and an intentional fallout, while also documenting reputational, financial, and emotional harm to the accused. Intent indicators, coordinated timing. Public statements were released in quick succession by the three accusers, suggesting prior coordination. Bao and Shylily admitted in live streams to having discussed and sat on the information for a period before going public. The calculated timing aligns with audience traffic windows and peak engagement, raising the question of strategic amplification. 2. Paradox of framing. See the Bao-Shylily Paradox. Either they knew the harm this would cause and proceeded anyway, suggesting malice, or they didn't grasp the impact, suggesting negligence. In either case, intent or disregard is established. Narrative engineering. Repetition of keywords like manipulation, gaslighting, and abuse without substantiating operational definitions implies a rhetorical strategy more than an evidentiary one. Emotional live streams supported by selective screenshots and indirect accusations suggest a strategy of framing rather than objective reporting. 4. Emotional appeals versus operational language. The use of strong emotional appeals paired with moralized vocabulary serve to frame the audience's interpretation and reduce the perceived need for critical analysis. Reframing business-oriented behavior, e.g. exclusivity negotiations, editor contracting, as betrayal relies on the fusion of personal and professional boundaries, a pattern observed throughout all three statements. Harm assessment. 1. Reputational damage. Sinder's character was labeled with severe allegations, manipulation, gaslighting, to an audience of millions across Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. Even if some viewers remain neutral, the association with those terms can result in long-term branding harm within the VTuber community. Financial fallout. 2. VTuber revenue depends on viewer support and merchandise sales, collaborations, and brand sponsorships, all of which are undermined by negative public association. Loss of collaborators, damaged community trust, and public platforming of private issues likely resulted in tangible income disruption. Emotional and social isolation. Statements and streams created a bandwagon effect, encouraging further isolation and backlash from fans, creators, and potential allies. The public nature of the condemnations allowed no space for private repair, forcing the defendant into a defensive posture. Conclusion. While direct proof of malicious intent is difficult to establish without behind-the-scenes messages, the circumstantial evidence, timing, language, and amplification suggest the plaintiffs either understood or willfully ignored the predictable consequences of their actions. The harm caused, reputational, financial, and emotional, can be reasonably traced to their behavior. Whether framed as targeted defamation or reckless negligence, their actions meet the criteria of harmful conduct under both legal and ethical scrutiny. Counterarguments and rebuttals. Overview. This section anticipates potential defenses or counterpoints that might be raised by the defendants Bao-Shylily and Nanoless. Each counterclaim is evaluated for legal validity, logical soundness, and consistency with the documented behavior of the parties involved. Where appropriate, rebuttals are offered to demonstrate contradictions, speculative reasoning, or misapplications of terminology. Counterargument 1. They were just expressing their feelings. Claim. The defendants were emotionally hurt and merely sharing their perspective with their audiences, not engaging in defamation or coordinated attacks. Rebuttal. While emotional expression is valid, its public presentation to large audiences, coupled with emotionally charged language and speculative claims, transforms expression into influence. In legal terms, intent and foreseeable impact matter. If a party knowingly publishes accusatory content that can be reasonably expected to cause reputational damage, the emotional origin does not shield it from scrutiny or liability. Counterargument 2. This was not coordinated. It was a natural reaction. Claim. The defendants did not plan a coordinated response and merely reacted to unfolding information. Rebuttal. Bao and Shylily both admitted to private discussions before going public. The release timeline, language alignment, and reinforcement of themes, e.g. betrayal, manipulation, gaslighting, show narrative consistency more likely to arise from planning than coincidence. If coordination is proven, it strengthens the case for strategic framing and reputational targeting. Counterargument 3. They had proof, screenshots, and testimony. Claim. The defendants shared screenshots and first-hand accounts as evidence of wrongdoing. Rebuttal. The materials presented are largely circumstantial and interpreted through a lens of personal emotion. In several instances, screenshots lack context and accusations are framed around intense speculation rather than demonstrable fact. Emotional testimony is not inherently invalid but is insufficient as sole evidence for serious claims like manipulation or gaslighting. Counterargument 4. Sinder never denied the core claims. Claim. Sinder's lack of forceful denial in her response implies guilt or admission. Rebuttal. Sinder's response emphasized more remorse and accepted responsibility for professional missteps, not personal wrongdoing of the nature claimed. It is common in PR strategy to avoid inflammatory responses. A refusal to match emotional escalation does not constitute an admission of guilt. Additionally, her explicit statements denying knowledge or intent directly contradict this assumption. Counterargument 5. It's not defamation if it's true. Claim. The defendants shared their truth and did not fabricate events. Rebuttal. Defamation can occur through implication, omission, and misleading representation, not just direct lies. The Bao-Shylily Paradox outlines how truth presented with intent to harm or truth mixed with interpretation framed as fact can still meet defamation thresholds. Emotional honesty is not a legal shield if it is used to mask a damaging narrative. Conclusion. Many of the anticipated defenses rest on emotional framing or assumptions of innocence and motivation. However, legal standards do not hinge on emotional perception alone. When viewed in light of the evidence and pattern of communication, the actions of the defendants suggest forethought and responsibility for the harm caused. As such, even the most charitable interpretations of their behavior fail to absolve them from critical scrutiny under legal and ethical frameworks. Public figure standard. Overview. This section clarifies the legal standards and burdens of proof applicable when the plaintiff is a public figure, such as content creator or VTuber. The classification affects how defamation claims are evaluated, specifically the threshold for proving actual malice. Definition of a public figure. Under U.S. defamation law, a public figure is someone who has achieved pervasive fame or has voluntarily injected themselves into a particular public controversy to influence its outcome. Public figures include celebrities, influencers, and digital content creators who actively engage with large audiences. Application to Sinder. Sinder qualifies as a limited-purpose public figure. While not a celebrity in the traditional sense, she has a significant digital footprint and operates a brand in a highly public space. She has also voluntarily participated in discussions and professional activities within the VTuber community, thereby accepting some public scrutiny. Oh my god, I need to drink water. Oh my freaking mic. Oh man, I've been doing 2 hours of reading. I'm gonna lose my voice. Legal burden of proof. For public figures to succeed in a defamation claim, they must meet a higher burden of proof. Specifically, the plaintiff must show 1. Falsity. The statements made were false. 2. Publication. The statements were communicated to third parties. 3. Injury. The statements caused reputational harm. 4. Actual malice. The defendant knew the statement was false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth. Meeting the actual malice standard in this case, actual malice may be inferred based on prior coordination, evidence that the defendants privately discussed the allegations before publicizing them, narrative engineering, repeated use of emotionally charged and misleading language, timing and application, release of statements during periods of peak engagement, selective evidence, omission of exculpatory context and shared screenshots or statements, the Bao-Shylily Paradox. If the defendants viewed Sinder as a friend, The decision to go public demonstrates foreknowledge of the harm it would cause. If they saw her as a business rival, their public framing suggests strategic defamation cloaked in moral language. Either interpretation may demonstrate malice or, at minimum, reckless disregard for reputational harm. If these patterns are found to reflect foreknowledge of reputational harm or willful disregard for objectivity, they may support a finding of actual malice under the law. Conclusion: as a limited purpose public figure, Sinder must meet the high threshold of actual malice in her defamation claim. However, the coordinated nature of the statements, timing, emotional framing, selective evidence, and the implications of the Bao-Shylily Paradox suggest that this threshold may plausibly be met. The defendant's actions go beyond mere emotional reaction and into the realm of potential reputational targeting, thereby justifying legal examination under public figure standards. Preliminary legal analysis. Overview. This section outlines the foundation of the legal argument, assessing the available facts, applying relevant defamation principles, and evaluating whether the conduct of the defendants rises to the level of actionable harm. The objective is not to determine guilt, but to evaluate whether the plaintiff's case is plausible and meets the threshold for further legal scrutiny. Framing the legal question: did Bao-Shylily and Nanoless engage in coordinated public actions or statements that, whether explicitly or by implication, falsely represented Sinder in a way that constitutes defamation under the law? Summary of allegations. The plaintiff alleges the following. 1. Defendants made statements to large audiences implying misconduct. 2. Statements were emotionally charged and interpreted business operations as personal betrayals. 3. Defendants used screenshots and narratives without full context. 4. The impact of these statements was foreseeable reputational harm. Preliminary evaluation against defamation criteria. 1. Falsity. Some claims presented as fact appear to be interpretations of private messages, selectively framed and lacking full context. While no outright falsehood may be proven yet, defamation by implication remains a valid avenue. 2. Publication. The statements were broadcast to massive online audiences via Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. This meets the standard for third-party publication. 3. Injury. The plaintiff has faced reputational damage, emotional distress, and potential income loss. Comments across platforms reflect a shift in public perception. 4. Actual malice. As outlined in the public figure standard section, malice may be inferred based on the defendant's prior coordination, emotional narrative, omission of context, and the logical inconsistencies found in their own presentations. Role of intent and context. The timing and emotional tone of the releases, coupled with the Bao-Shylily Paradox, create a strong case for foreknowledge of harm. Even if the intent was not explicitly malicious, recklessness in the handling of sensitive information could satisfy the legal burden for actual malice. Conclusion. At this preliminary stage, the legal framework supports the possibility of a defamation case. Whether the court would find in favor of the plaintiff remains uncertain, but the thresholds for injury, publication, and potential malice are reasonably met. Further exploration of discovery and legal examination would be required to fully establish the claim. Preliminary conclusion. Upon thorough evaluation of the available facts, contextual framing, and the legal standards that govern public figure defamation, the plaintiff presents a case that meets the preliminary threshold for actionable harm. The conduct of the defendants Bao-Shylily and Nanoless reflects a pattern of emotionally charged, publicly disseminated statements that appear designed not only to express grievance, but to shape public perception through selective framing and implication. The content and delivery of these statements were highly emotional yet conspicuously coordinated, suggesting intent or, at minimum, reckless disregard for the reputational consequences to the plaintiff. The Bao-Shylily Paradox further compounds the issue. The defendant's simultaneous framing of the plaintiff as both friend and professional associate undermines their stated intentions and supports a reasonable inference of foreknowledge of harm. While some of the presented claims by the defendants are grounded in subjective interpretation, the absence of clarifying content, the broad amplification of these claims to mass audiences, and the defendant's continued reinforcement of them, even after the plaintiff issued rebuttals, create the conditions under which actual malice may be legally argued. Given the pattern of conduct, public exposure, and logical inconsistencies, this case warrants further legal scrutiny. The plaintiff's rights to fair representation and professional integrity may have been violated under both legal and ethical standards. Whether through malice, negligence, or emotional opportunism, the defendant's actions appear to have inflicted reputational injury disproportionate to the evidence presented, qualifying this case as one of potential defamation. And then appendix, related media sources. And then exhibit A, false statements presented as fact. This appendix has, a lot of stuff. I'm not going to read the appendix. I'm not. They also reference court cases, so I do appreciate that. Appendix, legal precedents and doctrines. This appendix outlines key legal cases and doctrines relevant to the defamation claims discussed, particularly concerning public figures and the standards of actual malice, defamation by implication, and the distinction between opinion and fact. So these are like court cases. For example, let's see, New York Times Company versus Sullivan. Milkovic versus Lorraine Journal Company, Mason versus New York Magazine Incorporated, Gertz versus Robert Welch Incorporated, Hustler Magazine versus Falwell, Boss Corp versus Consumers Union, Clayman versus City Pages, Franklin versus Dynamic Details Incorporated. So this man cited his sources. This person cited their sources, or whatever. And then, if you didn't know, there's a link to the Crash Out doc, which I can probably cover later. But I read a lot. Oh my gosh, I read a lot. But like I said, you can find this on X. You can find this on X. If you guys didn't know, it's on X. It's by the user YasuVF. There are two links, one for the document I just read, Sinder versus the Clout Coven, and there's a Crash Out doc, which I'll probably read later. This is old news. Let me reiterate, this is old news. This was posted on May 7th, 2025. So, yeah. My voice is dead. I wanted to read that and present that to you guys. Let me know what you think in the thoughts below. And I probably should have said the disclaimer, but this is made by someone. I just wanted to read it because I think it was really interesting. And let you guys know, and what do you guys think? Do you think that's true? Do you think it's not? And remember, guys, everything I use for the video will be in the description below. I encourage you, the viewer, to go to the source, so that way you can come to your own independent conclusion.